Hey everyone, welcome to the Growing with Fishes podcast. This is episode 3. Sorry for the delay. I had a couple of problems down here in Jamaica as far as getting some of my audio worked out, and I had a car problem earlier which delayed me a little bit. I got stuck at the grocery store, so I apologize, guys. But thank you for being patient. I'm Steve,
I'm Marty.
And we do the Growing with Fishes podcast. We've had it's been a week since we've done this. Sorry about having a week off. It's just I was jet setting around the island here and down in Jamaica, trying to get everything settled, and I honestly didn't have a good enough internet connection anywhere I was for us to be able to host this. So we kind of gave up on trying to do it last week and just figured we push it back till I get settled again. So I'm back in Montego Bay. I'll be here for at least a month or two, unless I end up having this other project that I will announce once I'm able to talk more about it. That I might have to leave Jamaica for temporarily. But yeah, so Marty, why don't you tell us what you have going on?
Well, in the flower room, I still have the train wreck and Berry running. Those are both or they're both, I want to say like 6.5 weeks now. So they're in their 7th week. Yeah, everything's been going pretty well. Went through and thinned out the canopy. I bought an AC/dehumidifier. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but basically just needs to be large enough to, you know, cool off my garage. It's getting up about 82 degrees outside, so it's going to start getting hotter here. It gets up to probably around, in the dead of summer, it'll probably get up around 100. So I want to be prepared for that, make sure that I can keep the humidity down. So I got that hooked up in there, and I'll probably shoot a video of that coming up pretty soon. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have going on at the moment. I'm getting ready to start the outdoor. I have clones that I have that are growing out for that, and once I get that built out, which will pretty much be the same as last year. I did actually get the liner in. I think I told you there was a company that was going to send me some fish grade or food grade liner, ultra skim something or other. I'll get all the info.
Yeah,
It just came in today, so I'm going to line probably my old hot tub. I have a cheap old hot tub that we just didn't use anymore, and so I'm going to line it all out and just use it as like a pond, basically. But it should give me better insulation than just like an aquarium for outside. And again, I'm mostly looking to keep it cool as opposed to hot, but insulation is insulation, so hopefully that'll work out. So you can look for that. And then I'm going to build out another system just for doing clones with. Basically going to make a little veg room out of 2 storage racks and some panda paper. So you'll see that coming in the next couple of weeks probably. But yeah, gearing up for outdoor, getting ready to put the no-tills in the ground. Yeah, normal spring stuff. Nothing as exciting as Jamaica. Steve, are you there? Looks like we lost Steve.
there we go. Sorry about that. We had a little hiccup there.
There you are. Yep. You're back.
Okay. Yeah, we had a little hiccup. Like I said, every once in a blue moon, there's a hiccup here. I apologize to everyone that's watching this live or on video. We do, down here in Jamaica, the internet is not quite the same as the US, so every now and then I kind of skip. But it's not too bad. It's about once every couple of hours. So.
Well, that's good. I don't know how much of that you heard or where you cut off.
You were talking about you just put your clones. You got the ultra scrim for your clones and your other hot tub.
Right. So yeah, I got that together, and getting ready to set up the outdoor, which will basically be the same, except for with the hot tub as the tank. Gonna go with 1 plant per half barrel, and yeah, I think it's gonna work out really well. They'll be out probably about a month sooner than last year, also, so I'll get an extra probably 5 to 6 weeks out of veg time that I just just because I simply didn't have it done last year. So hopefully I'll be a little more ahead of the schedule this year.
So what date? Actually, that's a great question for people at home. What date are you looking at to put your plants outside?
Well, I'm going to go here both for the aquaponic system and for the soil plants that I'm going to put out. I'm going to put them out on June 1st. I could put them out a little bit earlier than that, just based on the light schedule for this area. I could put them out probably even 30 days sooner than that without having to worry about them starting to flower before they would go back into veg. But for me personally, I am going to cover my greenhouses this year, so I don't want them to outgrow my greenhouse. And because I'll have to get some video of it, but out back, if you look on some of my older videos, you can see I have such a wide span in the valley that I get, daylight the entire time, the entire day long. So my days are so long, my season goes later, my plants grow taller, and they take longer to finish. So it's nice, but it also makes it go a little bit later. You get a little bit more chance for mold and rain and that kind of stuff. So I don't want them to outgrow my greenhouse because I'm going to cover it this year. Otherwise, I would probably put them out in really probably like the 15th of May would probably be like the earliest I would put them out without being concerned about them getting a heavy frost. So.
Yeah, I know in Colorado you always put them out the second to last or last weekend of May. Last year we put some out the second, third week of May, and we had 3 straight weeks of cloud, or like literally 2 or 3 straight weeks of cloudiness, and it straight up started to push them into early flower, and I damn near freaked out. But what it ended up doing is almost monster cropping the plants because they had that real heavy boost of that flowering hormone, and then immediately went back to their veg state. And it almost ended up working like a monster cropping, where you take clones late into flower, or 2 or 3 weeks into flower, and then clone them over and root them. So it ended up working out really well as far as yield and harvest. I know my THC bomb. I don't know if any of you guys saw online the picture of the one where it does my forearm next to a cola. That was that THC bomb that started to go into early flower and for literally like 2 weeks in the beginning of May, and then switched back to veg all summer long after that. And man, the node spacing on that, it didn't branch much, but the node space, I literally had like 3 or 4 foot long colas. I've never seen that. It was absolutely ridiculous. We had single colas that were almost a pound, or not a pound, but a half a pound. It was absolutely ridiculous. So I've never had that kind of yield off of single colas like that before. I know some real large growers out in California and stuff where they're a little bit longer time and a little bit better soil and stuff. But at least for aquaponics, that was by far some of the heaviest yielding plants I've ever had.
Yeah, and genetics plays a big role into the size of cola too. Like especially if you look at the 2 strains I'm growing right now, or even the strains that I grew in my previous grows on YouTube. If you check those out, the lemon OG, for instance, was just sort of that classic OG, really lanky, but still really good quality, super frosty, hard nugs, but they're just spread out. You don't get big colas. The Platinum Delight was obviously the other way around. It was very purple, and you got a lot fewer branches that grew a lot more in sort of that Christmas tree sort of style, and the lower branches were just that. They were significantly less yielding than the main top branch, even though it had been topped in veg and all that kind of stuff as well. It seemed like they always some genetics just seem like they always regenerate that one large top cola. So, and I've seen that in other people's grows as well, in that way. And so, like right now I have the Trainwreck and the Shishkaberry. It's almost the same thing. I have one that's really lanky, but it's still really frosty. Looks really great. It's just lanky, but for the scrog, it actually kind of works out because you get more of those second branches that grow up into the canopy, and so you can actually, it's probably going to yield quite a bit more overall but there'll be a lot of medium size and small nugs as opposed to the large colas on the train wreck. On the other side, it's already formed up and, you know, grown together, some nice colas at the top. And so genetics plays a big role in what your overall bud structure is going to be like, and that's why people phenome hunt and grow different strains, and, you know, everybody's looking for that sort of perfect yielder. I mean, that's just part of the fun, right?
Yep, absolutely.
I lost your audio, Steve.
Sorry about that. The other thing I wanted to touch on was that the other thing that you mentioned in the beginning is that you were insulating your fish tanks and all of that. And that's something that's extremely important for anyone putting fish tanks in the ground. You know, taking the flat top roofing insulation, you know, you can find a construction site where they're redoing the flat top roof. There's 4 and 6 inch insulation on most flat top roofs below that tar paper, which most people aren't aware of. You can take that, put it underneath your fish tank or your pond or whatever else, and then you have free, you know, you gotta get it out of the dumpster, but throw it in a pickup truck or a moving van, and you got really good insulation for your pond at home. And then, you know, whether or not you're trying to keep it hot or cool, you're insulating it from the ground. Now, if you're trying to keep it cool, it might make sense for you to wick some of that heat into the ground. Now, if you're in the South, anything, you know, lower than South Carolina, you know, as far as their latitude goes, and southern, it's to your benefit, honestly, to allow that heat to leach into the ground, because you're going to help purge off some of your summer heat, which is honestly going to be a bigger issue. But if you're in a northern latitude, you don't want to lose that heat in the wintertime. If you're going to heat that water artificially with gas or electric or whatever, you need to make sure you're thermally insulated from the ground, which is 55 degrees or 57 degrees or 52 degrees, depending on where you're at in the northern hemisphere, you know, farther up, you know, Pennsylvania or north, or even, you know, Virginia or north, for the sake of argument, as far as latitude goes, you know. And that's an extremely important thing to think about. If you're going to put it in a greenhouse and you're going to put it in a huge aquaponic system in your greenhouse, be sure to insulate all of your ponds. And anytime your water or pond liner is touching the ground, you need to insulate that. Otherwise, you're going to lose heat, you know, get heat loss without any kind of issue, you know. That could definitely be a problem. So make sure that you do that. Otherwise, you're going to run into, you know, you're going to burn fuel. You're going to spend electricity that you otherwise wouldn't have to. You know, reduce your cost as much as you can. That's the better. We're all trying to move to aquaponics. It's more organic. It's more cost efficient. It's more water efficient, and we don't spend as much resources. So that's really what we're all working toward collectively. You know, so it's super important. So you want to talk more about that as far as what you were doing to make sure, you know, for what your system?
Right. And so, you know, you kind of have to know where you're growing at. Like, so I know outside in the summertime, I'm going to have to deal with extremely high temperatures. And so it's just something that, you know, that you can't really avoid. And last season, I basically just did a lot of water exchanges in order to keep the water temperature cool, and even threw in some ice packs on the really hot days to be able to get through. And that was basically just in a, you know, regular aquarium. It wasn't anything that was even insulated. So I don't want to change too much in the middle of the grow or really do anything about it. And I actually made it through pretty easily just doing water exchanges with cold water during the heat of the day, and kept the temperature down. And that's really like probably like experience growing where you're at and paying attention to that and knowing what your water temperature is. Like everything else is really sort of relative to that. You know, like how much light you have coming in is obviously going to be an issue for when you're covering your tanks, but really what is your water temperature? That's probably like the two most important things you can monitor in your system are temperature and pH. And I know you wanted to touch more on pH today, but just even if you test it, or if you put a permanent temperature gauge in, or, you know, they're not expensive. You can get them at the pet store, even if you just want a basic one. Like, you know, even if it's not the most accurate temperature gauge ever, at least it's going to give you a rough idea of where it's at and when it's moving up and down. Regardless of how accurate it is, it will still be able to tell you if if it's going way up, then you'll be able to see it, even if it's on a crappy $12 fish tank gauge that you stuck to the side of the tank. It's still something to go off of, at least. So so for me, I know that I want to do less water exchanges this summer, and I want to be able to insulate it better. So that's ultimately what led me to looking into different options. And I'm always a big fan of using what I already have. So I have a hot tub that I don't use. So nice. I don't know if you guys can see. I think you have to. You're muted again.
As you can see, some nice Jamaican herb, about the same size as my head. I just wanted everybody to see that because it just got here, and I was very happy about that. So I just, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but if you guys want to see some nice Jamaican herb, you know, you can't complain.
Tell everybody how much you paid for that, so they can all be.
Oh yeah, so there's a pound there. It cost me about $60 US, so I can't complain.
You better not.
No, the issue is this. So okay, they have resin down to a science down here, like, and they have strains that are really happy growing, like with the 12-12 light cycle. They can get decent sized plants with a 12-12 light cycle pretty much year round. Like it only varies about an hour and a half plus minus. So at most here in Jamaica, so or not even an hour and a half. It's about an hour, slightly more than an hour and 15 maybe. So plus or minus 12. So that's really good. You know what I mean? As far as that. So crossbreeding some of our high yielding strains from the US with some of the stuff down here is what we're going to need in order to achieve, you know, high yields in the tropics. But we have, you know, different projects going on down here. We're actually working with the local the government down here to work on some of their preliminary laws and stuff based on some of the U.S. laws to make sure that there's, you know, some amount of pesticide testing and make sure no one's spreading, you know, toxic crap down here. And you know, just getting everything straightened out as far as licensing goes. We were supposed to be able to get our final licensing as of 2 days ago, but unfortunately, the new government changed a couple of weeks ago, and we had to apply with the new Ministry of Justice. So I actually have the final draft for our new application, which will be submitted in the next 1 to 3 weeks. Whenever the new application, the day they announce it, I'll have my application, and it's all done and finalized. I just have to send it in. But down in Jamaica, you're going to be able to apply for 5 different types of licenses. You can try for transport, extraction, cultivation, research and development, and transportation. You're one of those 5 licenses if you're a cannabis industry. And as long as you're, you know, licensed for one or all 5 of those, then you can operate in Jamaica. Jamaica is also one of the handful of countries that has signed some preliminary treaties with countries like Canada and Spain and Panama for export of ganja, which they call here, or cannabis, to other countries. So Jamaica is going to be one of the first countries to start massively exporting cannabis out of the country to other countries for their market, which is why I'm here. So we've been working with both the Canadian government, the Jamaican government, the U.S. government, the Spanish government, the Panamanian government, and trying to figure all of our licensing stuff, because once the new Jamaican government came in and we're like, well, yeah, we want to export this because it's a heavy crop from here and we kind of need an economic boost. It only made sense. You know what I mean? So we got involved with all that, and I've honestly met with so many different powerful people in the last week that my head's kind of spinning. Everything from the, you know, people that are not too far related to the prime minister to people that run the local, you know, gangs and everything else. So it's kind of crazy to see, you know, all levels of how everything operates in a country that's not first world or, you know, just different than what you're used to in the States. So you kind of have to get approval from everyone in your area to operate, and it's just different, you know. It takes a little bit of adjustment, but it is interesting to talk to all the different levels of people, get everything involved, and you know, just try to work this all out as far as with the new government changing hands. Almost, you know, they only won by 1 seat, so we had all of our pre-approval before with the old government, and then we had to reapply with the new one, and there's a little bit of adjustment with that, but we actually had a couple of good meetings in the last couple of weeks as far as that goes, and with some of the people over in Kingston. I actually just got back from Kingston a couple of days ago, where we're at, we had some real good business meetings and meetings with the people in government and stuff. So some of the bankers that are financing everything and things like that. So it's quite a thing. So we actually have a total of 5 different farms we'll be building out potentially at the moment, and we have potentially 7 more on deck that we might additionally get on top of that. And we're also doing a complete program with the schools in Jamaica, where we're going to be sending, I forget how many it is all on out. Once I figure out how much equipment we have brought down, but we just did a huge purchase order for equipment to bring down just for the schools. So primary and secondary schools, we were going to be donating a whole bunch of educational equipment. So children in these schools get to learn how to grow in gardens and everything else, and aquaponically. There's a big initiative down in Jamaica on how to grow vegetables and get gardens into every primary and secondary school on the whole island. And we donated a bunch of stuff to them so that they can get meat and vegetables from their system. Hey, Mushroom, come here a second. So here's one of my best workers, one of the guys that's been helping me out a hell of a lot down in Jamaica. I want to introduce him. Tell everybody your name. This is Mushroom down here. His name is Mushroom, and he runs everything down here. He's our Jamaican we're good Jamaican guys, and he gets everything going. And he's one of my good buddies down here, and he looks after us and makes sure everything goes off without a hitch. And he's a real good guy. So I just wanted to introduce everyone and say hello to everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
So he's one of my. He kind of manages everything for me as far as anyone under me and all that stuff. So, and figuring out the island and making sure that we know what we're doing and where we're not in areas that we shouldn't be that are dangerous and all that stuff. So, he's kind of our liaison on that. Here's my other coworker. She's coming by. This is my other coworker.
I'm bringing you a drink.
Okay, I can't
A
complain.
little rum, a little Coke.
Yeah, rum here is super cheap. It's literally almost as cheap as water by the gallon, and I can't complain as far as coconut rum goes.
Right.
But so they are my 2 coworkers that help me out the most. They live here. We're actually building out currently the first property that we're building out, which is where I'm staying at the moment, as a bed and breakfast that we're going to be building as both a training facility and a place for tourists and other people to come visit and hang out and learn how to grow cannabis right across the street from the beach. We're working on acquiring a couple of properties right across the street that'll be right across the street from the beach, and everything will be all set up. We have a big property we're in the process of building out down here, and anyone that wants to come hang out in Jamaica will be 15 minutes away from the airport in Jamaica, in Montego Bay, and come learn how to grow aquaponically, either cannabis or vegetables, whatever they want to learn. And we'll have a real nice bed and breakfast and a place for them to stay. We're right next to one of the best jerk chicken places in the entire island. We're right across the street from the beach. You really couldn't ask for a better place to teach people and everything else. And once we have that, then I can train my workers. And we have another farm we're working out on Kingston that we're working on getting all the equipment for at the moment. Well, this is the first property and it's the smallest, so I'm going to build this out first while we're getting all the equipment shipped off to our other properties and getting them built out. So while this will come online first because it's the smallest acreage wise, and then everything else will kind of slowly come online after that. And then we have properties down in Martha Brae, up in Ocho Rios, down in Kingston. We have another one potentially out by Negril. So ultimately we're going to be all over the island by the time we're done with this. So it's a lot of fun. It's really interesting to see all the different types of different areas of the island, all the subcultures interacting. And honestly, I've spent maybe 10 minutes in the tourist area of this island. So the bulk of my time here has been spent living like a normal Jamaican and living with normal Jamaicans. So, it's been a really great experience so far. And I've had a chance to, visit some of the highlands. In a couple of weeks, I'll have some video footage. In a month or 2, I'll have some video footage up by Orange Hill, where the best land race comes from in the whole island. My business partner down here, his family actually lives up there, so I'll get some video of how you make charas, and which is a hand palm rolled hash. It's real similar to scissor hash, but they palm roll it off live plants while they're in early flower, and a whole bunch of other things. So it'll be really cool. which we'll have for you. But we'll get this all built out, and then we'll have a whole bunch of different footage for you guys of some of our other projects, and then we have some other potential projects up in Canada and possibly a few other places. We'll have some projects out in Spain at the end of this year or the early next year, depending on how that works out for us. And then at some point we'll have a project over in Panama for you guys to see. So we're, it's kind of exciting to see the cannabis market go global. I'll be honest with you, I I've met with so many different people. I can't tell you who it is yet because I don't have legal permission to say who it is, but I've been in contact with one of the best boxers on the planet on the project that he's been working on, and some of the other stuff that we're working on here too. So it's been really neat to talk to all these different people, all these different layers of life, and all these different people that just want to use cannabis not only to bring joy to people's life, but to do medical projects, to do research, to use it to fund other projects. There's a guy down in Jamaica here, the guy that I'm working with. The Cannabis project is basically to finance a humanitarian project where we grow vegetables at cost for locals and have a soup kitchen, which is why I even got involved in Jamaica in the first place. It's through a company down here called Apollo Trading. And their whole reason for getting into this whole industry to begin with, along with mine, was to basically come down, use the cannabis stuff to finance a humanitarian effort and get aquaponic production, because they don't have hardly enough meat production here. Everything's chicken, goat, or fish, and they've fished out the oceans pretty hardcore here. So we need to be able to do, tilapia, catfish, and other fish supplementation. They need meat. They need protein on this island, any island nation. And they don't have a whole lot of water. They don't have a whole lot of nutrients. They don't have resources. But Jamaica has really iron-rich soil, which we can use in a dual root zone system. We can cut that with some coca fiber, which we can get super cheap here because coconut trees are all over the island.
Right.
And bamboo for growing clones and doing trough systems for clones and stuff. So we can produce real cheaply and really economically and real organically with very low costs.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually have a number of my clones are now rooted in essentially it's the NFT system that runs on the drain out of my U siphon. So I find that the varying water level coming out of the siphon, where, because the siphon turns off and turns on, it inherently raises and lowers the water level in the NFT system as well. And I find it works great for cloning, and I think probably it would be really easy to set up in the bamboo troughs as well. So even regardless of what kind of siphon you have, wherever your drain is coming out, if you can set up an area to be able to do that, it's kind of a really easy way to be able to set up an NFT system where you don't have to have any sort of timers or worrying about what the height is going to be of the water in there and maintaining it and how much heat you're going to lose. This is basically just going to flow the water through the drain in the same way. You're just taking a better advantage of it.
Yeah, the other nice thing is almost all my properties here in Jamaica are sloped. So I can have one pump and pump to a reservoir tank at the top and gravity feed the entire system from one end of the property to the other. It's really good, and you can't ask for more for that, especially when I have a root. Some of these properties are the biggest property we have. I actually haven't been to the biggest property that we're working on at the moment. We just didn't have time to get over there. There was a bad traffic accident. You couldn't get over that end of the island because some parts of the island there's only one way to get there, and
right.
So we just scrapped it for the day. But that's actually almost over 1,000 acres, which is down in the southeast end of southwest end of the island. I haven't even been there yet. So we're gonna get going on these first couple of farms, and then once we have the the model established for scaling up. But we've just I have all kinds of hard data and everything like this for working for the last company, and we've done a ton of work working back in Colorado and everything else. So we're hoping in the next 2 to 3 weeks to start having some construction going here at the bed and breakfast. We'll have everything up and running, or not up and running, but at the very least we'll have some sub built and along. Right now we're currently having some more security put in on the property. We're getting the walls built up and some trees cut down to make sure no one can break in and steal our ganja. So once that's all finished here in the next week or so, I can actually start building. Before then, I'm not going to worry about I'm just.
So they're going to be
It's a big. Yeah, so theft is one of the biggest problems on the whole island. A lot of people don't have much money, and I can't blame them for stealing in the situation they're in. If you have 5 kids and you got to feed them, I can't blame you for stealing a loaf of bread. In fact, I'll give you a loaf of bread if I own a store. But at the same time, I need to make a living too. So we gotta at least get the place secured before we can start building. So that's the one, I guess, biggest downside of working in Jamaica is the fact that you pretty much have to secure your property unless you're in the middle of nowhere before you start construction of your actual production because they'll steal everything.
Right, and there's not a whole lot of middle of nowhere either. It's not like it's a large place. It's a
No.
relatively small island, and
You could do a lap around the island in probably 14 hours.
Right. So there's not a whole lot of middle of nowhere, which makes sense. I mean, even here, pretty much everybody in this area who has any grow of any size worries about security to a certain extent. I mean, it's probably, the biggest threat to your crop other than like maybe spider mites or mold or something like that. I would say it's at least in the top 3 with those. So are your systems going to be outdoors or indoors or greenhouse, or what are you thinking?
That's a great question. So here, the idea of doing anything under a greenhouse is there's simply too much heat. In the day, it's 85, and the night, 75, maybe 72. Unless you're at any kind of altitude, which only a few of my properties are. So I can't count on that on any kind of regular basis. So all we do is put a hail protector over the mother plants, and then underneath those, we have some DC systems, and we're setting up our very first LED sets of grow lights in our property in North Kingston. And that's where we're going to have our mother plant production. And then from there, we can disseminate to the rest of the properties just until we can get enough everything built out until then. But in our North Kingston facility, we actually have some grow lights and some DC solar panels and everything. And they extend the lights about 4 hours a day, past about 12 or 11:50. Well, I guess the shortest ever get is about 10.7 hours per day or 10.8, something like that. So hours per day. So, and that's in the dead of winter. It's like December 22nd, or what is it? December 22nd?
21st. My birthday is the 22nd.
21st,
so
sorry.
It varies a little bit.
It's off by your day. But December 21st is about December is the month you got to worry. But aside from that, we add 4 hours, so they keeps all of our plants in veg. So there's no problem with that. And then we can cut and clone, and we get real good consistency. They're all females, and there's no variability in our production as far as that goes, which most of the island is growing from seed stock. And, they could have 800 phenomes in one field. What are you going to do with that? Not to mention the fact that you then have to fucking purge out all your males. You gotta clear everything out, and then you have to worry about herms and everything else or weird genetics. We can have real consistency, and it's just a matter of bringing them out some of the U.S. production, techniques and some of the stuff we've learned up in the U.S. and then translating them down here to their production model and getting them used to kind of some of the stuff. And a lot of these guys have solar panels, they have batteries and everything else. They could use even a low level light, just enough to keep those plants activated in a veg with their handful of mother plants and produce year round. And it's just a new concept to them. Extracts and concentrates are another thing where they simply don't have a whole lot of experience with working with it. So until someone shows them how to make rosin and shatter hash or bubble hash, all those things are pretty new down here. And edible extraction, decarboxylation, all of that's kind of a new concept to the bulk of the Jamaican market. I'm not going to say all because that's not true, but a lot of Jamaicans have never been exposed to that kind of stuff, and it's kind of standard practice back in the U.S. as far as the cannabis market's concerned. So if they're going to compete in an international market, they need to be brought up to speed on this stuff, which is almost half my battle down here.
Right. I mean, obviously there's stuff that changes all the time. Like even here, everybody's gone through like the big rosin press phase now, where a lot of people are doing a lot of live resin, which is great.
Live resin's so good, it's expensive.
it's good, and it's expensive because it takes a lot of material, to be able to make it. I mean, it's really not that much different, I guess, than doing other types of extracts where, you take a whole lot of bud in order to make, it's sort of a very small amount. People have to understand. I think if you haven't seen the process, you don't realize, that it can take a lot of bud, for instance, if you're using bud or even trim, to be able to make even a press worth it. But if you have it available to you, I do highly recommend live resin. It's definitely great, or even BHO that's done extremely well. I have a buddy who makes it for me, and actually I don't know if you guys can see this or not. Something he made. He has probably like $40,000 worth of lab equipment, and he drops off different stuff to me all the time. That's the only stuff I have right here. But,
is that fully recirculating system, or is that a disconnected system?
Fully closed loop. He's got
fully closed loop. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, full closed loop, and then he's got I can't remember the brand. He probably kicked me for not remembering, but he's got some nice ovens, and he's got a whole lab set up that he does extracts that end up in dispensaries out here quite a bit. So he's done a lot of different stuff, and probiotic grower, outdoor, does amazing work, great stuff. And so I think that both of those are just concentrates in general, I guess. They change so often in how they do. I mean, you have BHO and you have PHO and you have live resin and different ways of making live resin. Everything from, you can use your hair straightener to do just a little press to be able to see what it's like. There's plenty of people on YouTube that if you want to check out how to do that, it's relatively easy. You can go low tech. I've seen people use t-shirt presses to be able to press rosin out, and big workbenches with presses, all kinds of different things. And I just really enjoy live resin. It's got a really unique flavor to it. I think you're still muted, Steve.
Yeah, it's because the chainsaw in the background's going a little bit. I just want to make sure you guys aren't getting pestered by. We got some yard work done. We have an ackee tree and a couple other trees we're getting cut down so that we can put a new wall in and put razor glass on top of the wall so no one breaks in. So we're in the. I don't want you guys to be bothered. That's why I don't know if you guys noticed. There's a little mic mute button next to my name sometimes. It's just I'm making sure you guys aren't getting bothered with the audio. We had a little bit of trouble getting the audio sorted out, which is why it took an extra 20 minutes. So I want to apologize for that. And it won't be a normal problem, but just this one time it would be an issue.
Right on. So yeah, I can definitely understand what you were saying about the outdoor greenhouses not really being an option down there because of the heat, and also probably the lack of power, I would assume too.
So the power, actually, I'll be honest with you, on the north coast is not too bad. It's just the fact that on the southern coast it can be quite a problem. But on the north coast is where most of the tourists are, the resorts and all that stuff. So it's not as much of a big deal. As far as some of the other issues, now on the southern coast you do have periodic power outages, but on the north coast where all the tourists are, there's not too much of an issue. But the biggest issue is every once in a blue moon, they honestly do get hail or high wind here. So on the eastern wall, we have because almost all the storms come from the east, go to the west. It's pretty much the opposite of what you would expect back home in America for the most part. Because of the way the trade winds blow and stuff. At least well, to be honest with you, I don't know if that's 100% all year round, but at least where my particular property is at the moment, it seems to be predominantly eastern winds because of the ocean and stuff where we are, as far as in relation to Montego Bay. So we end up having to basically block off the eastern side of the property with some higher trees and stuff to protect our grow. And that's been not as much of an option or not as much of an issue, but because of the way our property lays out, it almost goes downhill from east to west, the way our property is laid out. So it kind of helps us a little bit as far as the wind's concerned compared to other people in our area. But you definitely have to worry about, your local winds and temperature and everything else when you're planning out your grow. If you got a big mountain just to the east of you or something, and high winds come, it's going to blow back at you. So you got to factor that in. Definitely plan out. It's one good example why phenome type is more important than genome type. You don't exactly know how something's going to grow on your property until you've grown it a few times, or in your indoor grow, or this side or the other. Phenome matters much more than genome. You could have exactly the same as your buddy, give you a clone off the same thing, but because your environment's different, it's going to behave a lot different.
Right, and they've also, I've been reading a lot recently about the genetic variation of clones based on the environment that you grow them in.
Yep.
So when you, for you guys that don't, or maybe haven't checked it out, basically every time you cut a clone, you'll get, there's a chance of getting a variance or not a complete genetic code set from wherever you cut it from, so that it can have variations. And I've seen that in a couple of my plants as well when I've done my own clones, where like some of them even smelled different or even slightly tasted different, even though they were clones from the same mom. And so I think that it's an interesting concept that that you can get that kind of variation versus what you were talking about, doing it for the consistency, because you definitely do, like you're saying, when you have seeds, probably the biggest thing is just weeding out males.
Yep.
Can be a pain. And even when you learn how to do it, like, I've done it quite a few times now and been doing it for a while, and I still got one wrong this year. I pulled out one of my plants and put it outside because I was like 99.98% sure it was a male. And then I go outside after I get back from vacation and it's got flowers all over it. I'm like, motherfucker. But, it happens.
Those are the best of us. So let's talk about that. So some of the great early indicators for an early male plant. In fact, back in my Colorado go, and I have my girlfriend is going to take some pictures of that. I won't have video for you guys, but I will have some still pictures of the, which I'll incorporate into a video of the flowering and veg room. Just because I took all the camera equipment with me when I came to Jamaica, because I wanted to make sure I could give you guys good video content. I have 4 different cameras with me down here so that we can do really good content for you guys once we get the farm started to build out. I want to make sure I have tripods and everything, so I want to do like slow motion build out day by day. Like, we're going to do real good documentation, everything we do down here, and make sure that you guys are able to see everything we're doing in real time. So it'll be great. But the big, one of the, I lost my train of, where did we start that? Sorry.
Well, I think it kind of started, I was asking you what, how do you even start to cover 1,000 acres with an aquaponic system was, I guess, sort of what I was getting at. Obviously I asked about greenhouses, even though I know we already talked about it not being an option, but I wanted to cover that. And then also, one big system, we also talked about this previously before. Obviously, no, you're not going to do that. But maybe you just want to talk about that for a minute. And,
sure.
Why that's not a good idea, and what sort of size systems are you planning on putting in to be able to cover that large of an area? Because that's obviously a difficult task.
Sure. So ideally, I want to set my fish up around, at most, maximum, I'm looking at like 1,000 fish production per system. But the problem is that, or I guess the trade-off is this. So the more you compartmentalize your system, the more you have an insurance policy against catastrophic failure. So if I run all my systems as one, okay, and I'm running larger than maybe a 10 or 20,000 gallon system individually, and then the whole system crashes, say I have a 10 million gallon system, for the sake of argument, okay? If the whole system goes to shit, God forbid we have a hurricane, something else happens, some pathogen gets in it, I don't know. Anything unpredictable. You can't predict nature, you can't predict biology 100%. You can predict it mostly. Every once in a while, nature is going to throw you a curveball, and you got to be able to handle that and still maintain your normal production. So if I compartmentalize all my systems into smaller systems, I can run this strain in this system, this strain in this system, this strain in this system. I can dial in my nutrients a little bit better for each strain. You know, certain indicas and certain sativas, I'm going to want to stretch out longer or maybe adjust my dosages per week a little bit differently. And it makes a lot more sense to me to run strain systems, especially on the scale that I'm working on down in Jamaica, where I'm working on one strain per system and working on larger systems where I'm going to, you know, compared to working on, you know, a whole entire 1 acre or something like that. We'll just use that as an example. Not that you'd ever be able to do that, but it's almost reckless to do that, because the more you compartmentalize your system, even if you're running on a couple of, you know, yes, you have to pay for a couple of pumps, you know, a pump for each system, but because I'm all down slope, I can run it all on one pump, so I don't care. Okay, so
Right.
I'd rather have the insurance policy of, okay, well, this whole system went to shit, for example, went to crap, and I had disease or pythium or whatever. Not that that's ever happened to me, but we'll just use it for the sake of argument. Okay, all this is crap. We're going to trash it, restart over, recycle it, and we're going to go. I'm not losing 100% of my crop. I'm losing 5%. You know what I mean? So the more you compartmentalize any, and it doesn't matter for even farm growers. Why does he have different squares of different acres of different crops? Because he doesn't want to invest all in one crop and put all of his money into one basket. Because if God forbid something happens that 1 year, you get a drought, there's a freak insect population, there's this, that, or the other, a new fungus that shows up. You can't predict everything. You can predict 90% of it. That's all you can do as a farmer. You can't count on it. It's not 100% business. You have to have some amount of fudgeability, and by compartmentalizing your production, it gives you a way of giving you almost an insurance policy against crop failure. Yes, you might lose a percentage of your crop failure, but as long as you're able to maintain 60% of your crop, you're going to end up in the green, or we'll just use that for sake of argument, you're going to end up in the green. So as long as you produce more than 50 or 60%, just for the sake of argument, you're good. You know what I mean? All that's profit that you can then reinvest into new growth or whatever you're going to do with it. So by coming up with that kind of business model and getting consistency and all that, that's really what matters, especially when you're coming out into commercial production, which is why we're trying to teach the Jamaicans how to do mother and cloning rather than seed stock. Because if they're going to get to commercial production and sort of compete with the global market or get into THC or epilepsy medications and some of the other stuff that's honestly on the forefront of the cannabis market, cannabinoid, terpene extraction, all that stuff, you need to get to a consistent plant stock. And the only way to do that is by cloning off of a mother. Yes, you could technically do it off a seed stock, but no one's managed to stabilize the genetics of cannabis to the point where you can get a uniform monocropping off of a one seed stock. It doesn't exist in cannabis. Yes, it exists in corn and a whole bunch of others, but we haven't had the same number of years in genetic research into cannabis production as we have in corn, soy, you know, strawberries, some of the other main heavy production crops, where they've had decades and decades and decades and decades of, you know, commercial companies working on the genetics and getting to a monocrop where every seed is going to be identical. We don't have that in cannabis, which is why cloning is so crucial, especially when it comes to CBD, THCV, THCC, or THBC, and a whole bunch of these other epilepsy important compounds. You know, if you're not going to get, you know, heavy into production of those, or you're trying to get to the point where you can isolate those and increase production, you're going to have to start focusing on this kind of thing and working on cloning mothers and doing selective breeding and selective breeding off of clone stock versus, you know, see what I'm saying? You got to get the consistency of production if you're going to start producing medications and everything else. And if Jamaica is going to start competing with Colorado or California and things like that, they got to get to that point. Whereas right now they're currently producing mostly off a seed stock, which is an issue at the moment.
Right, because it has a much wider variance in genetics. Like, yeah, there's a slight variation in every clone that you take, and that's definitely a possibility, but not nearly the same sort of variance that you get in different phenotypes from strain to strain for, you know, maybe some people that aren't that familiar with breeding or genetics, especially people that are just starting, that have done aquaponics but maybe never grown cannabis before. that's definitely something to keep in mind, and that's what Steve's talking about here, is that the variance of seed stock is so great that it creates maintenance in the same way that compartmentalizing your grow does create maintenance by giving you extra stuff to do, giving you more pumps to maintain, more tests to run. It's the same thing with seed stock. It gives you more things to check for more often. You got to look for males, you got to look for Hermes, or even just underperforming plants that aren't worth being in the garden anymore. You'll find certain phenotypes, certain seeds. When you pop that seed, it just is not, it's not even worth keeping in there. You might as well pull it out and be able to put in a different one. Even if you just start from seed, a lot of times you'll find that you'll be able to grow another plant, or even put in another clone that's healthy and has vigorous growth, and it'll very quickly even catch up to other plants in the garden, in my experience. So it's definitely something that's that consistency is much easier to maintain when you're doing cloning. And in the same way you're talking about splitting up the system, not having one large one, comparing it to farmers who don't farm all of their land, gives them a portion to recondition that soil that they're not using, and when they're not growing on it. So it allows them to rotate. So essentially you're getting 80% of your crop 100% of the time, and just accounting for that 20% that you're either lose to some sort of failure, but it limits the amount of failure that you have. And that's the same concept that you have of, like you were talking about, the farmers growing on different patches at different times. So I definitely think that that's important. So what size system do you think, like, let's say you are going to cover that, let's even say 500 acres. Are you thinking like big, long grow beds? Are you thinking more vertical, like drop one level to the next?
Sure. So on the bigger grows, what we're going to do is long rows of individual rows of plants, and they're going to be compartmentalized into 20 by 4 foot grow beds. They'll individually flood and drain on the larger production. We've also done a little bit of tinkering with trying to get some major production with DWC, but we haven't had quite the same results as with dual root zoning yet. But we are trying to get there. We'll see if that is possible. We're trying to. The issue is you really start to flirt with lethality levels of fish in terms of high nutrient levels. I can boost the nutrients to a certain point before I start killing fish. But potassium, that starts giving me heart problems. Phosphorus gives them some kidney and liver issues. So we start running into issues where normal hydroponic production starts to affect certain organs of the fish. So that's one of the bigger issues where we've had with DWC. So we've pretty much been primarily sticking to flood and drain, and still sticking with dual root zone. Yes, it takes a little bit of extra work as far as planting. And when you harvest, you got to separate that soil from the media and stuff. But with a normal grill, like you get what is it called? Diamond grilling you use for chase lounges or grill tops and things like that. You can take that. There's a company out there, I think it's like Soil Devil or something like that. And they make this really cool little cart, and you spray through the top. And I just take my hose, I hit it with that. The soil runs through the bottom. I separate my hydrogen. I can dump that into a wheelbarrow right next to it. And then I separate my hydrogen real easy. My soil goes through the bottom. I can take that, dump it into my compost pile, let it dry out for a full grow cycle. Then I reuse it. Because we're only boosting the nutrients 30 to 35%, we don't have to worry about making a super hot soil or super burned out soil that, once it's gone through just a 2 or 3 month, compost cycle, which is pretty normal as far as adding a few other, food scraps and stuff from our kitchen. We everything back, and not even food stuff from the kitchen, but leaf scraps, fruit scraps, and everything else. We have a whole bunch of fruit trees and everything else, and that sugar production, along with them, it really helps get the mycorrhizae going, and we can immediately recycle our soil, after about one grow cycle, using a dual root zone method, because again, you don't have to supplement too much and actually make that soil so burned out that it can't, it's a problem.
Right. Essentially it's like, maintaining living soil in a, where your soil, as opposed to feeding your plants. So in a lot of cases, you're not dealing with, any of the things you would deal with in like a strictly hydroponics environment where you have like salt buildup and you're concerned with EC and different stuff that's left behind from having to give the bottle nutrients something to attach to before they get to your plants, and then all that stuff is left behind after it's been absorbed. So that is one thing that you wouldn't have to worry about if you were going to go with what is it? I forget maybe you can remember what it is, but I was just watching some videos on a different type of EWC with using more things like, essentially the same kind of stuff that we use now, which is like brewing different teas and stuff like that. I want to say it's like
You call it disconnected?
cracky.
Yeah, cracky, yeah. So
Cracky.
what they do is they run disconnected loops where they run a system that's on a valve. It's a valved off system where they can vent water from their aquaponic production system into a hydroponic production solution. And then they can boost that solution as needed and wait till the plants strip it out and reconnect it to the aquaponic system. There's a lot of people, there's a couple of companies actually trying to work on that as far as fruiting crop production. The problem is that they almost always end up with an imbalance in their water, end up having to dump at least a portion of the reservoir. So that's the problem. If we're trying to get to a fully recirculating system or a fully ecological system or eco-minded system, you really want to get to something that's fully recirculated where the plants are able to strip out everything that's going to be filtered for the fish and vice versa, where the fish are able to provide all, as much. They can't provide 100%. I don't want anyone to think that as far as aquaponics. Fish cannot provide, no matter how hard you try, 100% of the nutrients you need for cannabis production or even lettuce production. You do need a small amount of supplementation, and we'll get to that topic really soon. We're going to touch on pH and stuff, but pH especially will affect your availability of your nutrients, and you need to maintain your pH level as well as your iron level and a handful of other nutrients depending on the bulk of your production of your aquaponic system. Otherwise, your plants are going to strip it out of your system and you're going to be left with a nutrient deficiency. It's going to express itself in one of a few ways. You're going to have lower production. You're going to have less leaf production. You're going to have less fruit production. You're going to end up with a plant that doesn't taste quite the way it should, depending on what you're looking to do. Regardless of whether or not you're doing it for commercial or home production, you want it to produce the best it can. And that's really what this whole podcast is about. Is Marty has a dramatically different opinion on how to go about this whole thing than I do. And I love that. His opinion and his methodology is dramatically different. Both of us get great results. And we can't argue with results. So the way we go about it is dramatically differently, but we both get decent results and good results. So his different way is different than mine, and you can kind of pick and choose from what you like. And that's why we started this whole podcast in the first place, and why even though we don't agree on everything at all, we managed to come together and come up with this great thing, because we both agree that people should know both halves of the coin and decide for themselves what's best and what will work best for them, and let them understand both halves of the coin and both ends of the stuff, and really realize what's the best way to produce for themselves and what works best for their own individual soil or tap water or whatever they have to work with, and understand what their good base is, and then work from there. That's why I love the fact that his methodology is so much different than mine. It's because he still produces great bud, I produce great bud, and you can't argue with the pictures of either of ours. They're both fat buds. You can't you can't argue with fat buds. So
Right.
I think why I love talking to you.
It was always been, right, I guess for me, starting in aquaponics, it was fun for me to be able to build systems out of stuff that I already had and be able to use stuff that I normally just threw away to be able to make more food. And so that was pretty much seeing how far I could take that is sort of how I got to where I'm at now, to where I'm still doing all that same stuff. Everything that I use is something that I already would eat, like leftover fruit that I'd normally just throw away that goes into the worm bin. There's obviously things that I purchased in order to get there. Like I had to purchase the worms, which I got from my local farmer's market, which was great. And started my own worm bin and got that going. So it definitely took an initial investment. But for me, I really wanted to be able to do that. So in aquaponics, that was pretty much like I'd done all of growing all kinds of different stuff before I ever started growing cannabis. And when I've talked about this before, as soon as I knew that I could grow tomatoes, and I had nice big beautiful tomatoes, that I could do cannabis. And I think that probably the biggest thing on my side, which I think we talked about in a different episode too, is that I have well water, and I wanted to highlight that because a lot of people that that have well water, I don't feel like understand what a value that is in aquaponics, because it can provide so many of the nutrients that you do need, that you would have to manage a whole lot better than what I have to manage them, for the simple reason that they already exist in my well water, and that pretty much a 50% water change can balance out pretty much any of my macronutrient issues, because that's what's already in my water. Now, if you have tap water from the city, from any city, any tap water, just about anywhere, you're going to have to deal with a whole lot of other issues, starting with the water itself is going to contain chlorine, which you're probably going to have to do something about, and it's going to have all of those other minerals are going to be filtered out of it 3 times over. It's going to be, it's like an empty shell of a water, as opposed to natural flowing water, or well water that has many other minerals that are already in it. You're right there, Steve? You're muted.
Yeah, I was just looking for something. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So yeah, that's, I want to highlight the well water thing, because if you have well water, or if you have spring water, or any of that kind of stuff, it can be a huge advantage to you doing aquaponics, because you'll find you'll have to supplement a whole lot less. In my case right now, the only thing I supplement is the worm tea. I have looked into other like microbes, some beneficial microbes that I can add into the system, which I think it's important to differentiate between adding microbes and adding nutrients, which is that adding microbes aren't really going to do anything to add nutrients into your system. They will break down nutrients that are already in your system that maybe aren't being properly broken down already, but they're not going to add iron to your system. They're not going to add potassium or phosphorus to your system. They'll break down what's already there and create more of it and make more of it available. So some of your fish waste, depending on what you feed your fish, can break down into more phosphorus than what your worms are already producing, especially if you don't have a healthy population of worms. But for the most part, when you're adding in any type of microbes that you might get, like supplements that you can find at like your local grow shop for living soil microbes. I've seen, like, I think Raw Nutrients has a little packet of beneficial microbes. You have Mammoth P, which I know you've used a lot.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Mammoth P. Anyone that's not out there who hasn't tried Mammoth P. So you guys understand that, like, the nitrogen cycle, the nitrosoma, the nitrospira, the what's the third one? Nitrosoma, nitrospira, nitrosoma, nitrospira, I think is the chain. But anyways, so what the Mammoth P does is that gives you the whole lineage of phosphorus chelating bacteria. One of the other ones that's good out there as far as well is the Key to Life has a really good phosphorus chelating bacteria chain. Use their Key to Microbes, or they have Key to Microbes, and they have a second product, which the name's escaping me at the moment because I don't have any physically in front of me down here in Jamaica. They have multiple products that are extremely good at chelating minerals and making them available. So if you add some of that, you don't need to add more of the mineral. That will make more bioavailable and plant available, so the plants can uptake it. And that's kind of what Marty's getting at, is you can either add nutrients or you can add microbes. And there's 2 differences. And one of the other things you can do, the third option would be to add a sugar or an ethanol. And what the sugar or ethanol does, we'll use for example. So whenever I add potassium or iron to any of my systems, I always add molasses and a little bit of raw sucrose. And what that does is it helps the bacteria that feed on both iron and potassium rapidly replicate and multiply. And then once they burn out on that first carbon source, which is the sucrose or alcohol that I just added, vodka dosing is another way to reduce nitrates. There's many different examples of this in organic agriculture. And as well as reef tanks, you can research vodka dosing for reef tanks as well as far as nitrogen reducing. It works just the same in fresh water as it does for salt. If you're using it in the same application, and dosing is fairly similar. But what you can do is feed these microbes so that once they breed out of control, they switch over to their primary nutrient source, which is making potassium or phosphorus or this, that, or the other bioavailable. And that's one of the biggest, research ends of the current cannabis market, is which microbes fed which thing correspond to which nutrient availability. And that's honestly a huge percentage of the new microbe market in the whole cannabis industry, period, is I don't need to add more of a nutrient. All I got to do is add this, that, or the other to make it more bioavailable. Well, one's significantly more cost effective than the other. If I'm just adding sugar or something or an ethanol to my soil base or to my liquid base, it's a heck of a lot cheaper than buying a powdered potassium extract. You know what I mean? So depending on what you're looking to do and all that, and looking to extract and make bioavailable, that can make a huge difference. I'm going to step out for like 30 seconds if you don't mind. But if you want to talk about how you maintain all your stuff for pH, I'll be right back. I just have to take care of something for 30 seconds.
Sure, no problem. So yeah, for pH, basically, I start out with my well water, which we already talked about. It comes out high pH. It comes out over 8. And so I never have to worry about anything in terms of adding anything to bring my pH up, because again, pretty much a water change is all I really need to do in order to correct my pH if I need it to come up, which I rarely do, usually just adding in enough water to account for evaporation balances my system pretty well, because it's high in calcium carbonate, so it sort of comes with a very large pH buffer to start with. So I do water changes occasionally, where I will just change out 50% of the water. I would say not very often, but I do get concerned about too much of that calcium carbonate getting built up in the tank, and then having to change out the water for that. So I would say maybe once every 2 months or so, I probably do a 50% water change on both the tanks. And then for bringing my pH down, so let's say I do a 50% water change, now I just added in a whole bunch of water that is high in pH, so that's going to bring my overall pH up. Once I get over that buffer, after a certain amount, it's going to start going up quickly. So I then add small amounts of pH down by general hydroponics, which is mostly phosphoric acid. And I add it in very small amounts into the fish tank in basically about a capful every 20 minutes or so, allow it to get mixed up before I test it again. And I step it down until I get between 6 and 6.5. So once I hit 6.5, then I pretty much leave it there, because as I start to maintain it just over the natural life of the pH system, it'll start to drop a little bit. But I let my pH swing from pretty much anywhere from 6 to 6.5. If it's not outside of that range, then I don't adjust it at all. So if it's above 6.5, then I bring it down. If it's below 6, then I bring it up. If it's inside of that range at all, then I just don't touch it. And as long as I keep up, for me, myself, as long as I keep up with my topping off my tanks, unless I do a big water change, I'm not having to do any adjustment. It stays relatively stable because I have a large amount of calcium carbonate already in my water. So I basically just don't want that to build up too much. And so about once every 2 months, I do a 50% water change regardless of whatever else is going on. So that's for my own pH stuff. I try to stick to the phosphoric acid. And again, General Hydro makes a pH down. You can look at the back of it, or you can look up the ingredients online, but it's primarily phosphoric acid. with a little bit of citric acid in there as well, and a capful every 20 minutes to step it down to where it's where I want it. So that's how I handle pH. I know there's lots of other methods that people use, including like if you don't have well water that already has calcium carbonate in it, I know eggshells or oyster shell is a popular option to be able to add in. So what do you use, Steve?
So for pH up, I mostly use calcium carbonate, potassium bicarbonate, although occasionally I use potassium sulfate, or not potassium sulfate, potassium silica. That's potassium silicate. Sorry, it took me a second to remember. Potassium silicate. I'm just down in Jamaica. I don't have access to all that stuff, so takes me a minute to remember. But yeah, so down in Jamaica or anywhere really, my primary go-to is calcium carbonate and alternate with potassium bicarbonate because it does a better job at maintaining KH, which will help both with your pH stability as well as your microbe replication. So those are two really important factors as far as pH up goes. And you know, anytime you're adding pH up, you want to either supplement with potassium silicate, where you're at potassium and silica. Silica helps with both disease resistance and yield and resin content with your cannabis production. And then calcium carbonate helps with both yield as well as cell structure and woodiness of your plant, so that you're getting a nice thick cell walls as well as the silica. So make sure you're not getting fungus. It'll help prevent fungal infections as well as you know, some of your easier bacterial infections or black rot or bud rot, and you know, some of your other easier to get stuff. Pythium is also called root rot. And then potassium carbonate or potassium bicarbonate are kind of interchangeable, except for the fact that potassium bicarbonate will raise your KH more than your pH, and then you're compared to potassium carbonate, whereas which will add your KH much less and your pH a little bit more instantly, depending on what you're doing. And it works, you know, extremely well. I've used pretty much all four interchangeably, depending on what the system needs at the time. But predominantly I switch between calcium carbonate, potassium bicarbonate, and potassium silicate.
Right, and do you want to talk about your method for bringing down the pH in a large water system?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about pH down as well. So for pH down, there's really there's only three options as far as I'm concerned. So you have carbon, so you can use CO2, either in dry ice, which is my favorite way. So if you have a brand new system that's over 10,000 gallons, take a couple, you know, 6 to 10 blocks of dry ice. And if your tap water is at 6.4, 6.8, or not 6.4, 8.4, 8.6, 8.8, anything real high, take a, you know, 6 to 10 blocks of dry ice, throw them in your fish tank and let them boil off over the course of a couple of hours. It'll look really spooky in there and it'll lower your pH, and then there's zero residual. The CO2 evaporates off and you're left with no behind with any mineral supplementation in your water. It doesn't screw anything up. The other option you can use is phosphoric acid, which will add phosphorus to the system, but depending on your current phosphorus level and your current calcium level, can dramatically impact your plant production. If your calcium level is skyrocketed, boosting your potassium level is no big deal, but it'll only help you. But if your calcium level is pretty low and you boost your potassium, or not potassium, phosphorus too high, you can end up with a little bit of an imbalance. So making sure that you know what your calcium and phosphorus levels when you're using phosphoric acid is very important. And you can get both those tests at any aquarium store. For planted aquariums or saltwater aquariums, the tests work pretty much interchangeably from fresh to saltwater with very little deviation. And you don't have to worry too much about that. So you can get a real good idea what the heck is going on as far as that goes, and then make sure you're not in too much of an imbalance. And while we're on that, I'd love to talk about, there's this chart called Mulder's chart, Mulders, and I'll make sure we get a link in the description here for that. But what that does is it basically shows you if you raise this nutrient too high, you're going to end up with lockout of these other nutrients. And that's why pH is so important. If your pH is anything outside of, say 6.2 or 6.4 to 6.8, you're going to get a huge lockout of many of your nutrients. The absolute peak of all nutrient availability is between 6.6 and 6.8 pH, but you can run it slightly above or below that depending on what you're currently comfortable with and what you're, everything else. And there's KH levels that correspond with that. But we're just remember that when you lower your dissolved carbonate hardness or available carbon in your water much below a 2 dissolved carbonate hardness, which translates into 80 parts per million, you end up with a literally a 50% drop in how quickly bacteria can replicate. So if you're primarily adding a microbe to your system at the time, or you're trying to add an ethanol or sugar and trying to boost your microbes, and your DKH is 2 or lower, your bacteria are not going to replicate at all at their optimal level, or at least at the level they could potentially be replicating at and populating your system and making nutrients available if your dissolved carbonate hardness is too low. And KH is one of the biggest nutrients, along with pH, that people never really touch on, is how important both those nutrient levels are in comparison to all your others. Even if all the others are off, as long as those are dialed in, at least they're fully available at the time. If they're way off, you could have whole nutrient sectors that are completely non-bioavailable to your plant, and you're going to end up with weird deficiencies, and it's going to pull your hair out. And that's why pH is so important for aquaponics or even hydroponic systems and even soil systems. You really need to keep it in that 5.8 or 6.6. My opinion is 6.4 to 6.8, but a lot of people run like a 5.8 to 6.8 pH range for the nutrient availability, and that's really the key to making sure that you're not locking out anything. If your pH is outside of that, you're severely cutting off the bioavailability of your nutrients, and by doing that, you're hamstringing your plants for no reason.
Right, and I feel like that there is a little bit of translation when you go from hydro into aquaponics, that's where you lose the reason for that, right? Because the reason for doing that in hydro is because you want to suppress other life from growing other than the plant that you're trying to grow. You don't want microbial life to take root and get root rot or any of those other things. And so that's where the methodology and the thinking, and I guess generations of doing it, the tradition of it, the culture of having it run at that lower pH anytime you run hydro, and why that's different in aquaponics, that if you do drive your pH really any lower than 6, whereas in hydro, you hear a lot of the 5.8 sort of numbers being tossed around as being more ideal. Well, really that is because it's low enough to discourage the microbial life that they don't want, and we do want. So that's I feel like important to touch on for anybody who's doing hydro and looking at aquaponics and saying, oh, well, I pH all my feeds at 5.8 because that's what every reference that I can find on the internet ever says. That's a little bit of the logic as to why hydro growers want to drive the pH lower than what we ever want to do in aquaponics.
And that's a great topic that I don't think we've ever touched on, is the biggest differences between aquaponics and hydroponics is that in a hydroponic system, in most cases, not all, there's a few people that run fully organic hydro and are trying to run live hydro. I will not poo-poo on them because hats off to them and their projects. But majority of people doing hydroponics add citric acid, they add hydrogen peroxide, they add all kinds of different things to maintain sterility in their system. They're trying to maintain a fully sterile microbial system, and that automatically, in my opinion, hamstrings the crap out of your plants. Not only that, your plants are going to have no immune system to defend themselves. That's why hydroponic plants, and I'll give you, ever since I ever started doing dual root zone planting, I have not seen a single plant, tomato, cucumber, cannabis plant, you name it, that has had powdery mildew in a dual root zone planting where they had the mycorrhizae available and the terrestrial microbes available, mainly Bacillus subtilis, which is the main microbe in charge with challenging the immune system of a plant, which is also found in products such as Serenade. Without that microbe present in the root zone, your plant's never going to develop a fully good resistance to powdery mildew or other fungal infections. Now, if you're in the tropics like I am with 85% humidity and 85-degree temperatures during the day, I need all the help I can get. So I need to have those microbes available in my root zone so that my plant can build an immunity to those microbes. Without having the exposure in the root zone, how is it supposed to invent its own immune system? It's like if you don't get a vaccination or a shot or exposed to chickenpox, for example, you're never going to get an immunity to it. You either get infected with it or you get the shot for it. One of the two. It's the same. The same applies to your plants. If you give them a really good, diverse root system, and you're able to give them that real wide biodiversity and root system, that plant's going to be able to fend off a lot more disease than a plant planted in a singular root system, with hydrogen or just soil. It's not going to have the biodiversity in the root system and build as good of an immunology system and an immune system compared to something right next to it, which is planted completely differently. And that's one of the things we're working in a lab and all that stuff has been, putting stuff, comparison across 4 or 5 different systems has been really helpful in determining.
Right, and I definitely agree with you in terms of probably the best thing that you can do for staving off pretty much any of the powdery mildew, even spider mites, aphids, any of those is have a healthy plant. Like they do have a natural defense system that is hamstrung in a hydro environment, and I know that people make it a lot about growing indoors. As opposed to growing outdoors, and that you don't have, any of the natural predators and that kind of stuff in an indoor environment. So that constitutes for part of it. I do think a big part of it is also the plant itself. And I noticed myself doing both indoor plants in the same system I did an outdoor in really gives me a difference too, just in the idea of, the outdoor plants were much healthier overall. And I, not necessarily that the indoor ones aren't, but just that I feel like that there is a difference in development and how fast they grow, that I don't know how much of it is tied directly to the lighting itself. Like obviously the sun is going to be much brighter and that's going to make a difference. But in terms of like, I think if I did all of the same stuff that I did right now, like let my cats go in out of the garage and like still had my shit stored around it everywhere and my kids go in and out all the time and like all kinds of stuff that you would never want to do in a hydro grow. And yet I don't see nearly as many issues with spider mites. Like, yeah, I've gotten them and had to deal with them like most people who've grown indoors have, but not nearly on the same level that I think that I would without having more, even though I don't have dual root zone, I do feel like just growing aquaponically, the plants overall are healthier rather than hydro plants that don't have that same immunity built up to some sort of bacteria that's in its environment, as opposed to a sterile one.
Yeah, absolutely. Running an aquaponic system, you run with hundreds of different microbes that are competing with root rot. They're competing with all your other microbes that are trying to get into the root system and infect your plant. They simply have other biodiverse competition. There's other microbes competing for the same food source, for the other metabolites that the plants are producing, the dead bark on the roots and everything else. And you're not getting this buildup of waste material that can then go and be colonized by a pathogen or a fungi and then start to cause problems because you're just running a really healthy high microbial level system. And that's one of the biggest differences that a lot of the people have jumping from the hydro to soil world when it comes to understanding the nutrient levels, is that bioavailability. Just because your nutrient is there doesn't mean it's bioavailable. unless you understand the microbe interaction works with the nutrients, you're not going to get the yields you're looking to achieve, or the bioavailability or the ppm levels you're looking to achieve in your nutrient solution, and still maintain something that resembles fish safe.
Right. And so, and I think another maybe important thing to touch on too is that when you do testing in an aquaponic system, it's different than doing testing like when I'm talking about testing nutrients, because if you mix up a batch of nutrients and just out of a bottle, you can test it and you can see what that parts per million is, and it's going to be that until you feed it to the plants. But your system is going to vary depending on when you feed the fish, depending on when you top dress stuff, when you feed stuff in. And so testing at different times, I feel like, is an important thing to do, and tracking how long between when you feed and when your result is can give you important information if you are going to track nutrient levels, and see what, say, parts per million you have phosphorus or any of those other nutrients. That they can be different at different times. Don't test it at the same time every day until you figure out sort of what the natural flow of your system is, because it's not going to be the same at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure you have, you're turning over your fish tank at least once or twice an hour, and you're getting good flow through your roots is equally as important, because if your plants aren't able to export that, you're going to end up with too high nutrient levels, and you're going to end up killing your fish in the long run.
Right. So you do obviously a lot more testing than I do. Do you have like a regimen that you go by, like how often you test, or like a length of time from when you feed to when you test to see when those peaks are?
Absolutely. So as far as nutrient levels go for veg, I try to never boost more than about 80 parts per million as far as nitrates go, specifically. And then as far as nitrates in flower, we never try to push them much past 20. We've really noticed a huge drop off between 20 and 30, or 20 and 40 more specifically, but a little less so 20 and 30 with your yield production. When your nitrate's higher than that, it tends to severely cut off the size of your buds. For whatever reason, that seems to be the threshold that nitrogen seems to factor into your bud size. So between 20 and 40 is really, you get a severe cutoff. It really depends on the strain, but predominantly it's between 20 and 30. And when you get much above that, you get a real severe, you get a lot more fluffier buds, and they never get quite hardened up. They don't get that rock hard bud and that real good weight you're looking for, and that density where, that thing is, I can't see through it despite the fact that it's the size of my hand, kind of thing.
Right. Or it takes a lot longer to get there too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like a lot of people, especially hydro growers that are used to being like, okay, it's 8 weeks, we're going to cut it down now. If you have excess nitrogen in your system, it's not like your plant is just going to die after it gets to 9 or 10 or even 12 weeks old. But probably what happens most of the time is people get tired of waiting for them to flower out all the way and
Yep.
just put it down. So it's like putting flowering in slow motion.
Oh, absolutely. It'll add weeks and weeks and weeks to your flowering. Not only that, your plant will almost re-veg, and at the tops of your buds, you'll end up with like bright green foxtails that are like, 2 weeks old, and right before harvest, so if you have stuff like that, and you're growing aquaponically, it's because your nitrogen's way too high. You got to get that down below 20, 25 in order to finish out. I know one grower that's managing to keep it much above about 40 with successful results, but he's running such higher nutrient levels where it's questionably fish safe. Realistically, you couldn't sell any of his fish as far as the aquaculture market's concerned, as far as the ppm levels in his water would all be well outside what would be legally allowable for aquaculture production, which is the line we're trying to split, is allowing for reasonable aquaculture production and still maintain, healthy cannabis production, which is a fine line to dance on.
Right. So what would you say is like your top, I don't want any more, say, phosphorus parts per million than what? What's your ceiling for what you consider fish safe?
For phosphorus, give me 2 seconds here to pull that up. Actually,
Either one.
I can tell you.
Potassium, calcium.
I can tell you.
You just know.
For those
I mean, you
two.
don't have to give me exact numbers, but obviously you do with dosage, whereas I just
yeah. So especially with calcium and phosphorus, if you slam your calcium or you have a super high calcium base source, you know you're gonna get some amount of phosphorus lockout, and that's like a great example of why the topic we were talking about earlier, which is called Mulder's chart, is so important. Mulder's chart, think of it as like a 20-way teeter-totter. If you have, and it has lines that correspond with what others. So phosphorus, for example, will lock out your calcium. Well, if your calcium is too high, you're going to have phosphorus problems, or if your phosphorus is too high, you're going to have calcium problems. So that's why, going back to things like Mulder's chart and things like that, and making sure that if you're boosting things, you're keeping them in a set ratio. That's far more important than exact ppm levels. Yes, you can adjust your ppm levels depending on what you need, but as long as you're kept in ratio, you're not going to end up with as many. You still will eventually end up with lockout problems, but you end up with fewer lockout problems as long as you're maintaining your proper ratios. Here we go. Finally loaded. Sorry about the delay. It just takes me a second on Jamaican internet while live streaming. So for phosphorus and calcium, I could tell you those two, at least the high end. So phosphorus, you're looking at, 100 to 150 depending on veg or flower, and calcium, for example, you're looking at 40 to 100 for aquaponic production. So, and that's, again, numbers are going to be totally different and that's all based on dual root zone planting. So that's not based on anything else. It's strictly based on dual root zone planting, where I'm trying to maintain as high as levels as allowable in my fish safe area where the fish are present, and then boosting anything above that in my soil layers so that I don't have to worry about fish toxicity or other agricultural or aquacultural issues.
Right. And so do you, I mean, since you have that layer, do you put all of your supplements in the dual root zone, or do you put some of them into the tank to go in through the full root system, I guess, if you will? I think we lost Steve.
Sorry about that. We had another hiccup with the internet.
You're sort of back.
All that, I apologize. Every once in a while, we have a the fact that you're on an island, I can't do anything about it. So I apologize.
It's buffering. There you go.
Okay.
Looks
I
like
apologize to everyone. We had a little bit of a packet loss down here in Jamaica, which we have because I'm on an island. So I apologize to everyone watching. Is there any other live viewers? We actually have 4 live viewers. What questions do you guys have? I know I had pulled up a a question or two. I know we had one gentleman with a question on juicing. I wanted to touch on that as far as my experience and Marty's experiences in juicing. And I didn't know if anyone else that's watching live had any other questions, but I definitely wanted to give y'all an opportunity to touch base if you're interested in doing so.
Somebody asked a question on one of the posts too. I don't remember which one it was though.
I know on my wall there's a guy asked about juicing. I juice it depends on what you're doing. If you're looking for a more THC or THV heavy plant, you're looking for something much later in flower. Marty, why don't you take over for a second? Actually, I haven't unmuted something.
Yeah, as far as juicing goes, I haven't done any juicing, but I've definitely heard good things about it. I know I've watched videos and different things on it, and I have friends that do it and swear by it. People that use it for just putting in smoothies, adding into their green smoothies. They just drink it straight, shots. I know it's been mixed into different solves, but I haven't personally done any juicing. I've just seen information about it, and I've seen friends do it, and I've tried it before, and it tastes like a green smoothie. That's pretty much like if you've ever had any green smoothie, you can add it to any green smoothie once it's been juiced. It's not really different than juicing anything else. But I think you were talking about, obviously later in flower it's going to have more cannabinoids, and it's going to be better, take less product, I guess, right, in order to have an effect on whatever you're trying to treat.
So if you're trying to treat a CBD type thing, CBD is actually primarily produced during veg, and then it's maintained during flower. So if you're strictly based on, a CBD strain, vegging or juicing at any time during veg is totally acceptable. Back home when I'm in Colorado, I take tons of leaves off. My fan leaves off. I'm not going to do anything with them. I just juice them and add them to all my stuff in the morning when I make my normal juice. I take them down in Jamaica. I just take fan leaves off my mother plants that I'm producing right now, and I go grab some fruit off the property. We have, I don't know, at least 20 different types of fruit trees on the property down here. I grab whatever fruits in the season at the moment. It's aki, orange, mango, banana, and nestberry. And I just put them all in the blender, a little bit of cannabis leaves, a handful of cannabis leaves, blend them, and that's my juice in the morning. It's high in protein, high in CBD, high in cannabinoids, gets you all set for the day, So it really depends on what you're doing. And just remember that CBD production is primarily during veg, not flower. So if you're doing a heavier CBD strain, lighting matters in veg, whereas if you're doing a heavy THC strain, lighting and flower matters a lot more. But if you're strictly focused on CBD, put your heavy lights. You want to have a 600 watt or 1,000 watt light in veg, not only flower but veg, because it's going to make a difference in your CBD production.
Right. So yeah, that's a great point, and it's not like CBD necessarily goes away as you go into flower, but I think probably the most important thing is that it sets in very early, and then like you're saying, it's maintained through flower. So it's a huge advantage to be able to use and extract CBD from plants that are in veg, especially if you're only after CBD. Keeping plants in veg and pulling fan leaves is a very, very easy thing to do. For those of you that haven't done it, that's a great advantage. And I've definitely, like I said, I've had juiced leaves, and it really doesn't taste like it doesn't really taste like much of anything different than you would have in any other green smoothie. Like somebody asked me, that was one of the other questions that I had, was about what it tastes like. So I don't know if you got, that's been my experience with it. It tastes about like what it smells. If it smells sweet, it tastes sweet. If it smells skunky, it tastes a little skunky. What do you think, Steve?
I found it tastes a little bit green, about the same as any other green plant you would taste. And a little bit is, as far if it tastes like anything. But I don't think it tastes bad at all. You know, I really like the taste of cannabis, and really kind of really grown to love it the last, you know, however many years it's been. But I always add a little bit of sugar or sweet milk whenever I do my smoothies and stuff with cannabis.
So somebody did ask a question on one of the posts. They asked you, what is your cycle to create a fertilizer? I heard that the only real homemade fertilizer that can be used in hydro/aqua is worm tea.
Yeah, worm tea is great. You know, you can do all different kinds of variations on worm tea. You can change it up, you know, any way you want. You can do a fungal dominant, a bacterial dominant, you know, and that's a really, really good supplementation for aquaponics.
Right, and one of the things to remember about it, though, is that the content is going to be very dependent on whatever the worms ate. So if you're just buying worm castings from like your local hydro store, especially earthworm castings, then they're primarily eating things like straw, hay, alfalfa, which are all going to be primarily nitrogen, which a lot of times you don't want to be supplementing. So if you're getting it from a store, I wouldn't recommend feeding it much during flower at all, because you're already going to have, you know, generally you're trying to do everything you can to consume whatever nitrogen you are producing. So that's one thing to keep in mind is with store-bought tea. I highly recommend getting your own worm bin going so that you can control what you feed it. Obviously, that's pretty much the only supplement that I do personally right now. So I do add stuff into that worm bin, like I've added all my fruit scraps, and then also I've added in labs that I mixed, which was the beneficial bacteria out of milk. In the process of doing that, we talked about that a little bit in episode 1. And so I inoculated that with small labs that I made just in a little jar. Basically, it started with rice wash, but you can use sauerkraut. That was another message actually I got from somebody too about how the process for making labs is relatively simple, which is true. It is a relatively simple process, or it can be, but you can also have a very extensive process. If you want to look more into it, I highly recommend you join the PFA group, Probiotic Farmers Alliance, on Facebook. And there's already information in the files. You can go in and look at the different methods, which are range from very elaborate, starting with a rice wash and how many days you should leave it, and how much milk you should put into it, and how long you should leave it then, and how much separate. There's very elaborate plans for doing it, and there's also very simple ones, as opposed to just ones that you can do in your fridge with yogurt or sauerkraut or different things that may not be as effective depending on who you ask. And there are plenty of people to ask in that group. I'm definitely not an expert on it. So if you want to ask somebody, that's the place to do it. It is very easy to do yourself once you know how to do it, you understand, and you have a method that works for you. It's not difficult to do. But anytime there's more than one way to skin a cat, people are going to argue about the best way to skin the cat. For me, you know, just find what works for you. And it's a very simple thing to make. It doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of resources, and the benefits of it are huge. And I've noticed, like I talked about this before, after I put it in my worm bin, it just breaks down everything faster. It just looks, the soil gets covered, and mycelium almost, like, even if I stir it daily, I could come back the next day and I would still have some started on top. And it's just, I highly recommend inoculating your worm bin with it. And then as far as my own personal worm bin, since it's the only supplement I use during flower, I don't put any greens in it at all. I don't even put like the ends of strawberries in there. I don't want any green leaf material getting into my worm bin and getting broken down, because I don't want to add any nitrogen at all. And then I use microgreens that I sprout right in the beds with the plants, that kind of give like a sprouted tea effect, on top of you know, consuming up nitrogen that is in the system, so that I don't slow down flower to an incredibly slow rate, which I have done and experienced in my, I think my second grow. If you watch on that video there, once I had harvested some of the other plants out of the system, the one plant that was left, I think I took it to like 16 weeks or something like that before it had finally hardened up, even though it was still quality bud in the end. It took a long time to be able to get there. And so you can kind of see that effect if you look at my second grow. I think it was the fruit punch, if I remember right. Took a really long time to be able to harden up, but still turned out well. You know, that's just the results of what happens if you don't consume that nitrogen. And that was what actually led me to look into using something else besides the plant to consume nitrogen in the system to get that plant to finish up. So I did a big water change, and then I planted green onions and I think leeks or something else. I can't remember what all I planted in there with it to be able to consume the nitrogen, and brought it down. And then it finished up in about a week or so. Really helped that along. But yeah, that's definitely something you got to watch out for, because I'm certain on that second run, some of my worm tea that I added into the system also added nitrogen, because I wasn't separating a lot of that stuff out at that point. So that's how I got to separating all that stuff out and learning about using different things to bring the nitrogen down in sort of a, I don't know, more of a DIY way of doing it, I suppose. You're muted again.
Do you want to talk about some of the stuff in cannabis news this week? I know I have a couple articles. Did you have anything you wanted to touch on?
You know, Oregon's been relatively quiet. Everybody's sort of trying to digest and figure out on the county level what different counties, how they're interpreting the new state laws that came out. So we're pretty much in what I call the runaround phase. There's not going to be anything that's going to happen. There are going to be people that are upset about, you know, like I am upset about the way new regulations are being interpreted by my local county. And it's going to take time where either we're going to have to vote people out, which is going to take time, and you know, different things are in process for that here locally in Jackson County. I know Douglas County is also, you know, has similar issues. Klamath County has tried to, I'm not sure if it's Klamath County, but basically up by Klamath Falls, that whole area is basically attempting to ban outdoor cannabis growth. So we deal with some ridiculous stuff on the local level, and it's going to take a while before any other actual change will happen. And then the same thing will be, there'll be a small change and a big uproar about it. Small change and a big uproar, and that seems to be the process that they'll follow. And then in between, obviously, you have politicians and everything else that need to either profit or gain power off of it. So.
Yeah, so that's actually a big issue in Colorado right now. There's some new state legislature where they're trying to regulate the percentage of concentrates to 15% THC, which is, to be honest with you, completely fucking ridiculous. Like, it's just absolutely just asinine. To, you know, what is someone supposed to do if they're on cancer? They need at least 4 times that amount per day. You know, this is ridiculous. You know, this is what this law was designed to you know, we passed medical cannabis to help people, not to hamstring them. You know, this is absolutely asinine. You know, 15% cannabis isn't going to do any, 50% THC is not going to do anything for a cancer patient or someone on AIDS or someone with any kind of serious medical disability. You need to have those really high levels of concentrates in order to start actually killing cancer tumors or treating. For my example, I have celiac disease. I can't live without concentrates. I have to make my own down here, okay? Without that, my digestive system's all screwed up. Okay, if I don't have that. So what are we supposed to do? You know what I mean? This is completely ridiculous. This is not fair to the medical patients. There's no, right. You know, I want to see a regulation on opioids for 50%. When we have a regulation for opioids for 15%, then we can talk. And until then, I don't want to hear it because it's ridiculous. You know what I mean? When you regulate, when you regulate prescription medication to that level, then we'll talk. Otherwise, shut up and give me my damn medicine because this is asinine.
Right. Or even it's not even like about getting your meds. It's not making it available. Like they even want to limit the ability to make it yourself.
That includes flour. No. That's not concentrates. That includes flour. So you know how many strains are immediately illegal? Like everything produced in Colorado is at least 18 or 22%, unless you're talking about a handful of CBD heavy strains. So good luck. You just bombed in a whole market. Good luck with that. You're going to sabotage an entire state's industry that's managed to keep you guys out of the recession? I don't think so.
Right. And, you know, that's probably the most recent thing that happened in Oregon was basically just the reinforcement of the same thing that was up under review of whether or not they were going to uphold the maximum amount that can be in, or percentages that can be in edibles and concentrates. And ours is set even lower than Colorado's. I don't remember what it was because I was too pissed off to pay attention. But Oregon is now the lowest of any state in terms of like availability, and it does piss me off to no end. But I don't like. There's so many different things that I feel like that they completely miss on, and this is absolutely one of them. It's like where we started with a medical community that was doing fine before we passed recreational, and there was legislature or that was supposed to prevent them from being able to regulate it at all, period. Written in numerous ways when we voted here in Oregon on Measure 91 and said, in no other way do you get to regulate anything over the medical marijuana program. And that's exactly what they're doing.
That's exactly what they do in these new, once you get legalized and the people get pissed off, they start fighting with local ordinances, with concentration ordinances, and all this other inane bullshit that has no place involved. You know, where's the pharmaceutical industry same level of scrutiny? They're killing people left and right. How many people die from opioids? 80,000 people per year die on average from opioids. 60 to 80,000 per the last 10 years. It's 60 to 80,000. Okay, when cannabis kills even 1,000, let's talk. But cannabis hasn't killed a single person except for maybe someone that got a little loopy and fell off a building or something. But that's about the closest that you get. But even then, you know, that's questionable as to whether my cannabis was even related. And there's only one particular case that I'm even referring to where that it's remotely questionable. It's because someone fell over a balcony. Okay, you can't even blame that on that. You know, that's no worse than someone just losing their balance and falling over a railing. That's the literal only case that anyone able to like 5% justify as a cannabis-related lethality case. They've given elephants 50,000 milligrams per liter of blood they had with THC. They give them 2,000 milliliters per gram or per liter of blood of acid. Neither one of those two things killed them. The elephant that got the acid had a heart attack, but it didn't die from toxicology or toxicity. Neither did the THC one that had a much higher threshold. And you're talking about a creature that is a much higher, you know, much larger creature. But humans, it's not possible. You'll die from oxygen displacement in your blood before you will of THC toxicity. So why we would ever make a plant or a compound illegal that is physically incapable of killing someone, regardless of how much you try, you can eat a whole plate of pop brownies. You could drink 2 whole gallons of cannabis oil, and the worst you'll do is not wake up for 2 days. You'll still breathe, you'll poop, you'll pee, you'll do all the normal bodily functions that keep you alive, your heart will keep beating, you'll keep breathing, and ain't nothing gonna happen to you other than you'll be real hungry when you wake up. That's about the worst of it. Maybe a headache.
It just doesn't make any sense at all, especially when you can go out and you can buy Bacardi.
Yes,
off the shelf.
or Tylenol, or Advil, or any painkiller, or water. Water is a higher toxicology level. There was a lady, I don't know if you remember this, a couple of years ago, back when the Nintendo Wii first came out, and they had a contest for who could drink the most water and win a Nintendo Wii for your kids. this woman drank 6 gallons of water and died, okay, in front of her children on a radio show, okay? Now, you're telling me that you're going to make something illegal that's less toxic than water? Okay, you have a mental problem.
Yeah, and a lot of people have a mental problem, that's for sure. But and so that's my
It's a cultural. Well, I don't mean to say that. It's a cultural problem. People haven't been exposed. It's an educational problem. People need to understand that this is a medical plant. It's no different than ginkgo biloba or ginseng or rosemary or anything else that people use to live longer and help themselves with health benefits. There's no difference. Yes, it has the additional capability of giving you psychotropic effects, but primarily, at least in the US, it's used by hundreds of thousands of people for them to have a basic medical base level in their life. Anyone with Crohn's disease, celiac disease, any autoimmune disease of the intestines almost responds to cannabis. MS, a whole wide range of different diseases have all benefited from cancer, HIV, the list goes on of people that have benefited from this. So why on earth is it illegal?
Right, then they go, oh, well, we get this all the time here. Like even at local council meetings and stuff that I've been to, it's been, we get this all the time too. Oh, well, we want to make sure and protect the kids. We want to make sure and protect the kids.
I give Mike, listen, I have a niece. I give her a pound of weed before I'd ever give her a bottle of liquor. God forbid she smokes the whole pound of weed that night or drinks the whole bottle of liquor. She'll wake up from the weed. She won't from the drinking the fifth of vodka. You know what I mean? And that's really what it comes down to. Which one's going to kill your child?
If they were really that concerned, they would not, that's what they would regulate, even more so than what they do now, because it's just as available and they can make whatever the laws that they want against underage drinking, but it happens everywhere. And so, I think that it's a valid point, not necessarily that anybody is saying or debating that alcohol is that much different. It's that they're hiding behind this perception that they're somehow justifying.
They're hiding behind cultural acceptance
because they're protecting the children from some sort of nightmare that they are convinced that exists from consuming it. So I think that's like the huge misinformation in Gab. It's like in a lot of cases here I have to get very technical with people, and I say, if I take a glass that is this big, if I took this coffee cup right here, which is a sweet coffee cup, by the way. But if I took this coffee cup right here and I filled it up with Bacardi 151, which you can buy at any
over the counter anywhere in the world,
have it, in their freezers, for instance, or in their liquor cabinet, or wherever it is that you have it. There's plenty of people that have it, and it is available, and plenty of people have it available to them. If you are a child and you get a hold of a glass full and you drink it, then odds are you're going to die. You could not fill, even with concentrates, you could not fill this glass enough to where you could drink it and die from it.
Yeah, you can put liquid shatter in there, smoke the whole thing out of a dab rake, and the worst you wouldn't do is wake up for a day or two. You'll breathe. You do all your You breathe. You do all your normal bodily functions, and there would be zero threat to your life at all whatsoever.
Now you would say crazy shit. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, you'd be high as a kite. Don't get me wrong. But at no point would your life ever be in danger. And that's really what this comes down to, is why are we regulating non-lethal compounds? Period. I don't care what the compound is. If it has zero chance of being lethal, which there's only a handful of, cannabis happens to contain a whole bunch of them, why are they illegal? This is asinine. There's no reason for this. And the only thing that's holding back is medical research, cancer research, and pediatric research, and pain research. That's the only thing this is hurting right now. And taxpayers. You look at Colorado, for example. We funded, $80 million to the schools, another $20 million to the local healthcare system in our state. Like that. You know how many states would beg for $100 million worth of funding, additional funding? You know, how many states are millions of dollars in the hole right now? This is ridiculous. You know, there's no reason for this.
I just read an article last week that said that the first month of tax revenue in Oregon was like 3.7 million in the first month alone, and that's, you know, that's money to state government that needs it. You know,
yes.
So in most of those, you know, obviously, like you said, that a lot of those programs that get funding are school related, and there are other ones which are important too. Law enforcement. I totally understand and get why, and a lot of people are mad about it. A lot of people don't want it to happen. Even people on our side of the fence that say, I don't want that funding to go to the people that have been waging war against us.
I understand that, because we've been waging a war for decades. You know, we've been on opposite ends of the coin, but at the same time, look at the benefits of that. Look at Colorado and Oregon. We'll use those two as an example. Colorado and Oregon have registered certifiable approved pesticide lists, so that you and I both know if we buy anything from a legally certified buyer, we're not going to get cancer-causing, you know, pesticide on our plant, which is something that a lot of newly legalized people aren't realizing, is that you need a base level of regulation to maintain proper quality control, so that no one's spewing out toxic garbage or just lower, you know, below par herb or below par cannabis. Sorry, everything in Jamaica is herb or ganja. Below par cannabis, and making sure that, you know, there's no one's getting sick. You know, I'll be honest with you, we need that. And I hope that Jamaica eventually passes a basic, you know, sample testing where for every 10 pounds or 100 pounds or whatever they decide on, you need to submit an ounce or so many grams per pound or whatever they decide, that just says, hey, there's no pesticides, there's no illegal fertilizers, there's no cancer-causing agents on this plant. Because this is no different than corn or cabbage or lettuce or tomatoes. This is a crop. This is an industrial food crop, and people's lives depend on this. And if you start screwing with that, you're going to screw with everybody. There's no reason for us to get a bad name because we're using a cancer-causing agent or something else, you know, ridiculous. We don't need that. We have enough other battles the cannabis industry has to fight than something stupid as pesticide, you know, when we can avoid it from off the bat.
Right, or just understanding I also think that it's important to understand that a large part of the desire that the police had to wage that war was financial.
Absolutely.
So I think if you look at it from a large perspective, which is, and it's public record, you can go look at how much funding that your local department got from whatever bus that they have.
Yeah. At least a third of most local police departments are funded by cannabis. Absolutely.
Right. And so I think you have to take away that desire. I think that ultimately, I don't want it to be a downside, because I feel like what should happen is that it should be treated like anything else. I want to be able to call the cops if somebody comes to steal my plants. Yep. And I want them to respond in the same way that they would respond to anything else that's being stolen. I want them, and I want to pay for that role that they would play in that portion. And that is probably one of the biggest concerns that people have, like we talked about, is security. Yep. And you're probably
the cops I have to worry about. It's everybody else trying to steal my herb.
Right. And so, and you want help in that. You know, you want to be able to call the police, which is not something that growers have been able to do for decades. Right. Yeah. You know, like that, and that's what makes them a target. Honestly, it's part of the reason why thieves go after it. It's a product that they know they can get rid of without asking questions to other criminals, that it becomes currency for them. So by not being able, and they know you can't call the cops. I mean, unless you're willing to shoot back, there's really not much else that
on that note, Colorado is the only state where you can shoot someone in your grow, as far as I'm legally aware of, because there's been 2 cases in Denver and in Boulder County where someone straight up shot somebody in their grow, and they got no problem as far as their grow is concerned. The only person that got charged was the guy they shot for breaking and entering. That Colorado, to my knowledge, is the only state in the whole lower 48 that allow. I don't know about Alaska. I would imagine Alaska might flirt with this too, But Colorado is the only one in the lower 48 where you can legally own a gun and legally own cannabis plants. Every other state, that's a felony, just so everyone's aware of that. At the moment, Washington and Oregon, as far as I'm aware, you correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it's still illegal to have both a firearms license and a cannabis registered medical license. Only Colorado is the only one where you can legally have both those licenses. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, Oregon did overturn that last year. They overturned, it actually went all the way to the, I don't know, the highest state court. I don't know if what they call that here, but I was reading about it the other day, and because I am a gun owner and I also grow cannabis, so it was something that I was concerned about, and it was basically a gray area that nobody cared about for a little while, and then once recreational hit last year, it really sort of pushed the case along, and they just ruled on it, I believe, the last part of last year, if I remember right, in which that they deemed it was unconstitutional. And essentially in Oregon now you are allowed to have both a firearms license and a medical marijuana card, but before that it was, which is also silly because, like, you know, it's essentially the only way that you had to protect yourself.
Yeah. Or, you know, otherwise you're looking at you know, you're dealing with, like, as if you're a felon, which is the only thing you really have as an option is a crossbow, which it's quieter than a gun.
Right.
But at the same time, it takes longer to reload. So if you got multiple people and you miss the first shot.
Right. And I think ideally what happens here is exactly what they have set up. They have a portion of the funding that is just going straight to law enforcement to be able to deal with the fact that they're going to lose the ability to be able to bust somebody and take their money. So was it a shakedown? Yes. But did they use it to pay for other services that would provide to other members of the community? Absolutely. And I want those services also extended back to the cannabis community. I want, when I call the cops because somebody's breaking in, I want somebody to show up and care about it and not just be like, oh, well, you know, good luck with that. We'll show up as soon as we can, which I'm sure is the response that a lot of people get now because of the animosity that's been built between the two of them. Or a lot of people that just won't even call, even though they might have a medical card. They just don't want to, you know, they don't want to deal with it. And I can totally understand all those perspectives. But for me personally, I agree with a certain percentage of the funding going directly to law enforcement, if not for any other reason other than to disarm their desire to want to get funding by busting otherwise legal grows. You know, coming up with excuses to bust illegal grow so that you can get funding. It goes down every fucking day and it sucks, but you know what happens.
That's one thing I definitely want to mention here, at least in Colorado. I can tell you this happened 1,000%. Is once they legalize cannabis, they will find every other reason to come pick on you. So if they legalize cannabis, at least in Colorado, their first 2 to 4 years, they were cracking down on DUIs like it was their job. So if you so much as had like 2 drinks and like you were 0.1 over, they were pulling you over immediately and then putting a breathalyzer on you. Like they will prey on you in another way. Like, don't think that they're not going to get their money. They're going to crack on down on you in some other way. And in Colorado, they came down heavy on the alcohol stuff. And just so you're aware, they're not going to give up their money without a fight. They need this amount of funding. They're used to their toys. They're used to their bullshit. They're greedy. You know, we all know that. They all have their way over expensive, you know, surveillance toys and crap they don't need, and illegal NSA surveillance crap. They got Stingrays, which anyone that doesn't know about is an illegal cell phone data mining technology, which you can put as app on your phone to detect if they're doing it to you. Please do that if you do, because then you know what they're doing. If you go to a major concert event or anything, you go to Burning Man or they're tracking all of your crap. That's widely known. They'll pull everything, all the data off your phone. But, you know, if you're doing something, you know, and you're, you know, less than legal or you're not in a legal state, just be mindful of what you're doing. Take care of your P's and Q's. Be mindful of all the different surveillance technology they have going on. And just don't be stupid about it. You know what I mean? And, you know, and lobby. Write your congressmen, write your senators, write your state councilmen, write your local city councilmen, and educate them. You have to remember, a lot of these people's problems is not, is sheer ignorance. No one's ever exposed them to like proper cannabis production, proper medical use of this stuff. They've only been told reefer madness. Don't hold it against them personally. Educate them. They're not bad people. They just haven't been exposed to the proper education. So don't look at someone that's opposing your view as they're your enemy off the bat. Go make an attempt to visit them, talk to them, write them an email, write them a handwritten letter, reach out to your local congressman if you're not in a legal state, and do everything you can to help make this happen. A lot of people would change their mind if they were simply shown someone that had a daughter that had seizure disorder, and you happen to show them the fact that their daughter's able to talk to them for the first time in a couple of years. You know, like some people's kids. There's a great example of this kid on YouTube who is autistic, right? Like,
yeah, like
he couldn't speak English, and he hit himself in the face. The kid's in school now and can communicate with his parents. They have their child back. You know, that's the best gift you can give someone on the planet, you know? So why would you try to take that away from them? But you have to understand, a lot of these congressmen and stuff, they've never been shown that kind of thing. So don't hold it against them. They're not bad people. Go educate them, write them, show them videos, send them YouTube videos, send them the things to change your family members' minds. That's the only way we're going to defeat this. You have to get out there and be the voice of action. You have to show them that things can be different. We don't have to keep putting up with this ridiculous stuff, and we can make the world a better place, and that's the only way to do it. We can't go out there and be negative. We got to be positive. We got to show them the other option, and that's the only way we're going to get past this in all 50 states.
And I think it's important, if you are not in a legal state, that if you do anything, don't fucking tell anybody about it.
Yes. Do not tell anyone. Doesn't matter if they're your roommate, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister.
It's more important than not getting caught. It's more important than anything else. I feel like in the sort of legalization movement, because it will take you from the category of people that are now, that were trustworthy people that can make a difference in the movement, and it has taken you out of that position and now putting you in the criminal position that they want you to be in, the bubble that they want you to exist. That if you do anything, do everything you can to not get caught. I understand why people do it. I understand that people do it. I know that there is a need to do it. I understand some people that are risking going to jail for a very long time just so that they can take their cannabis medication for legitimate illnesses, and even people that just want to get high. I don't care why you're doing it. I understand every side of the coin in terms of why you would want to grow and still consume in a legal state, and have done it myself. But if you do, don't get caught, not just for yourself, not for selfish reasons, but also for everybody else, because it will take you out, especially a felony. You won't even be able to vote in most states. Like, pretty much, I'm not sure about all of them, but I'm fairly confident that that most states do not allow felons to vote. Maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it will definitely take you out of the category of people that you are in and put you into a different category that they want you to be in, regardless of how you label them. Once you are in that kind of system, it just deteriorates everything that legalization is about. Even though I understand why you want to do it, just don't be an idiot about it. Don't grow 500 plants and then make a YouTube blog about it and, you know, post on
power. Number one, do not steal power. More people get busted stealing electricity than any other reason, because the power company gets pissed when you're stealing. That's the number one reason people get busted in the US, hands down.
Don't steal power. You know, if you're going to consume that power, at least pay for it. And we know if you're consuming it and you're doing your job, that you should be able to pay for it. And I don't blame you for that. I think that's great. If you can use that power and you can create a product and you can sell it and you can profit off of it, then I think that you are just as good as anybody else who creates any product and makes a profit off of it. I have no problem with it personally. But if you do it illegally and get caught and they make you a criminal and an example for doing it illegally, then that hurts the rest of us in the legalization process. So don't be stupid about it. Do it. That's great. Just don't be stupid. I think we lost Steve again. Is anybody watching live? Hello? I don't even know if I'm still in the air or not.
Sorry about that, everyone.
I don't know if I'm still live when you go.
Because it says it's lighting it. Man, that'd be people watching.
I keep asking chat, but nobody says anything. So
I can tell me 2 seconds. Assuming we're back live again. I apologize. The internet here in Jamaica, we occasionally have a short packet loss because we're on an island. No, we're still live. We're good. We're good. We're good. Yeah, no, we're all good.
I just don't know if I'm still live when you drop off.
No, you're not. No, there's a brief cutout for 15 seconds or so. 15 to 30 seconds. So it doesn't matter, where you are, what you're doing. If you're working in Colorado or Oregon or anywhere else, if you had waited a year or two, just to 6 months to a year, and you get busted the last little bit, you just bombed your future for working in your state's cannabis industry or anywhere else for that matter. So you're far better off either moving to another state where it's already legal and getting your foot wet and learning how to do it there, or waiting, to be honest with you, just being patient in your own state before you get serious about growing. You might be able to do a smaller grow, get your foot wet, get your understanding down where it's still easy to keep under tabs and keep under the radar. But you don't want to start moving to commercial production or anything crazy before it's legal, because honestly, it's not worth the risk. Even as someone that's in the industry and has done it on both sides of the coin, in more than one part of my life, allegedly, it's not worth it. Straight up, at this point, we're so close to getting social acceptance and full legalization. Don't blow your future. You could be doing this the rest of your life, what you love doing. Just be patient or move. Please, just be smart about it.
Right, and I guess on that same sort of be smart about it, or I guess things that end up giving us a bad name in terms of the cannabis industry, I feel like the other part of it is or another part of it, not the only other part, but another big part of it are people that blow themselves up open blasting.
Yes, that's another big one.
Or poison themselves with butane they buy at the liquor store that's made for lighters. If you do either of those things, please stop. That's the best thing that I can say.
Well, for one, it's a felony in both Oregon and Colorado to home extraction with any
any solvent.
Any solvent based. Yeah, in Colorado or in Oregon, it's any solvent, and in Colorado, it's any butane based. So most states are and I'll be honest with you, ultimately, like the long-term future of cannabis extraction, CO2 and other forms of and rosin are going to be the future. Butane extraction will go away. In the next 3 to 5 years, that will be a relic of the past. Yes, you can get particular variants out of it. Yes, you can get good extraction out of it. Yes, it's relatively safe in a fully closed loop. But the fact that you're dealing with a hydrocarbon, which is potentially explosive, versus literally any other extraction method, which doesn't deal with hydrocarbons, which are not potentially explosive, gives it a safety edge up. Yes, there are other essential oils that are done with hydrocarbons, but there's no reason that cannabis should get to that point. We can isolate terpenes, we can isolate cannabinoids both without having to rely on BHO. If we can isolate all of those with both, there's no excuse at this point. You know what I mean? There's simply no reason to get away from these more dangerous extraction methods. Yes, BHO is a good heavy yielding way to do it, but rosin gives you better yield with a slightly different cannabinoid profile. Terpene extraction uses ethanols, which is technically a hydrocarbon, but you're still much safer because you're able to do it under less pressure and everything else. So depending on what you're doing, you know, there's really no reason to resort to BHO when you have so many other options unless you're real backwoods.
Right, and even then, you know, like rosin press is really easy. You can do it at home. There are a million different ways.
Higher yield than BHO. You know, if I can get 28 to 35% extraction on rosin versus 20 to 25 on BHO, why would I ever go with BHO to begin with when I can get more money? Even if you're talking on an illegal market, you can get a better profit off the rosin. So why would you even waste your time? Not to mention the fact you can blow yourself up in the process.
Right, and the problem is, from a legalization standpoint, is that when you do it, open blast, whether you poison yourself with shitty gas, or whether you blow yourself up because one little spark hit the room, you're still going to end up on the news. You're still going to be an example of what we don't want. I think we lost Steve again. Keeps getting disconnected.
Sorry about that. I think next time we try to do this podcast other than in Jamaica. I do apologize for anyone that's had a bit of a hiccup here.
Yeah, it's making our time run pretty long too.
Yeah, I apologize for that. We'll get this straightened out next time. I ran into some problems last minute. We were trying to have more time to set up in the beginning, and it just didn't work out quite as we had hoped to. But we'll get this all worked out in the future for everyone.
Is anybody watching live still?
There's 5 viewers live, actually. We've had the most. I put this up yesterday. It's the most we've had live for the whole course. So every podcaster having more live viewers. I appreciate everyone tuning in, and Marty and I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone that's subscribing to our channels, both Marty's and mine. Marty's is AP Meds, mine is Ponics, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time to subscribe and like and everything else, and putting up with our BS this week.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, we want to definitely answer those. So you can use the group chat over, it should be on the right side there, or you can message either one of us on Facebook if you, for some reason, can't see the chat or it's not working.
Yep.
Shoot us a message. We had somebody post on one of the in one of the groups, just post their question on there. So if you can't make the live feed and you want to have a question answered, we try to post the link ahead of time, and feel free to post on that.
Yeah, the goal, assuming everything goes well, we'll try to do this every Wednesday. The time will vary slightly depending on what I have going on down here in Jamaica, and because we have to sync up with Central and Pacific time with Marty and I, but it'll vary slightly. But the aim is for us to do this on Wednesdays and or the worst Thursdays every week for the podcast.
Right, and like I said, we had I had one person send me a message with a question beforehand. That was the question about making labs. I guess it was more of a statement about how it's not necessarily difficult to do. Then the other question was about the fertilizer cycle. And I know we talked about that a little bit, but I would say, or I guess one question I still have for you, when you do your testing, how long or after you feed or before you feed, or when do you find, because that was one of the differences in, I feel like in hydro and aquaponics is that a lot of times your nutrient levels are going to spike and then ideally go back down to zero. So if you're waiting too long after you feed or you're testing too soon, and so since I don't do a lot of nutrient testing or really any at all, wanted to pass that question on to you, is when do you feel like is that, have you done any like testing at different levels to be able to see when that peak is, like say 2 hours after you feed is when you see the max nutrient level?
Sure. So most of my feeding and testing regimen, so I normally almost always feed in the mornings. When I get up in the morning, I check, make sure all the pumps are running, everything's clogged, everything's running good in the systems and everything. And then we I'll feed in the morning, and then I generally don't test in the morning. I'll let the system kind of run during the day, and let the fish uptake everything, let them poop out all their stuff, and then I generally test everything in the evening when I do my evening rounds. And that's usually when I do almost all my tests. I can't back unless I really think there's a problem currently going on with the system. I don't test in the morning. I almost exclusively test later in the day. The other exception would be if I think I have a KH problem. I'll test 4 times a day, right before I go to bed, right the moment I get up, and then when I do my morning rounds, and then when I do my afternoon rounds. And then it gives me 4 different data points. And if you're seeing a huge fluctuation across, a 12-hour period or an 18-hour period, you have a KH problem. Your dissolved carbonate hardness is going to affect your pH stability. But that would be the only time I would check them multiple times a day. Otherwise, I always check them between 3 and 5 o'clock. And that more so has to do with the fact that I have a lot of other crap I have to get going during the day. And I could do it all in the morning and just do it all in the morning, but I'd rather feed in the morning, go take care of my other stuff, and then test everything in the afternoon. Especially if I test it and I need to adjust something and I want a double dose. So say my magnesium is way off, or my pH is way off, or my calcium is way off. We'll use those 3 as an example. I'm going to do those over a 2-dose rather than a single-dose supplementation, because I'd rather add a smaller amount of nutrient level per hour than I would over a longer period of time. So I'm going to mix up a slow dose dripping system or something that doses, a set volume to dose the whole tank over 2 or 3 hours. And then I'm going to have to reload it again, 3 to 4 hours later. So I'd rather have that adjustment time, have a long time for it to dissolve and mix into the whole system. If I need to adjust it from the night before, I'll adjust it that night or the next morning. And then I know that, by the time I check it again in the afternoon, it's had adequate time to recirculate and give me a good relative even average amount on the whole system. If you're running an extremely large system, like 30,000 gallons or larger, you could have some amount of variability between the start and end of your system as far as nutrient level, and you do need to monitor that. But as long as you're checking it in 3 different, ends of the system, top end and medium, fish tank, maybe at the beginning of the system, and then middle way through the system at the end of the system, you'll be able to get a pretty good accurate reading of how your nutrient uptake is per day. So it really depends more on the size of your system than it would be anything else, but I generally always check in the afternoons. But that's more so personal habit than anything else.
Right, and I suppose there would be a little bit of logic behind that. If you're testing at the end of the day, like especially like right after lights out, for instance, then your plants have already done their heavy feeding for the day, and you're pretty much, looking at what would be deficient at that point going into the next day, and you can supplement that, have it cycle through the system before they start feeding again.
Exactly. Your plants aren't going to uptake anywhere near as much when they're in their nocturnal phase as they do when they're in the diurnal phase. So as long as you're checking them, you're relatively close to when your lights go off. Or in veg, it's less important because they're pretty much constant. But definitely in flower, checking it right around the time when your lights go off is is far better than checking them earlier on, just because, again, like you're saying, they've already pulled out most of their nutrients for a day, and it gives you a much better idea of what your final solution's looking like at the end of the day than if you checked them in the beginning.
Right, and then also understand that if you do test during the day, that it's going to read higher because those nutrients haven't yet been consumed, and that's where it's much different than testing hydro, because most of the time in hydro you're just mixing everything into one big solution and testing it to get it right where you want it, and then you put it in and let the plants feed. And so a lot of times, like, because that's when I started, there wasn't a lot of information about dosing for aquaponics. All of it is based off of hydro stuff, and so you have to, kind of go through and and sort out what applies and what doesn't. Like the pH level we talked about earlier, really you're just going to be fighting yourself if you drive the pH that low for any reason.
Exactly.
So there are some things that translate and some things that don't. And so in this case, when you are doing nutrient testing, you can't look at it as a static reading. You can't say, well, I tested my system today and it was at such and such ppms, and expect it to be the same thing at the end of the day. So whatever time you do test it, just understand when it is in your feeding cycle. If you don't feed till later in the day, then that's, that may be a problem for your plants. If you're dosing later in the day and you're feeding later in the day and most of the nutrients are becoming available at night, you could start to see a buildup if you also dose at night. So you could, if you test in the morning and dose at night, or don't account for that difference, then you can easily burn your plants, or even kill them, or your fish obviously would probably be what you would have an issue with first most of the time, unless you're using something like extremely hardy, like koi, for instance, might be fine. But yeah, I definitely think that it's important to note the difference when nutrient testing in aquaponics versus hydro, because it's not going to be as static. So if you're looking through hydro stuff, or you've done hydro stuff before, just be aware that it's not always going to be the same. And towards the end of the day, you're going to have less because the plants draw nutrients out of the system.
Yeah, and the other issue is too, when you get above about 10,000 gallons, it takes so long for that whole system to recirculate and fully dissolve into the rest of the system that even if you supplement something in a system of that size, it's going to take almost a full day for that to get fully dissolved into the whole system, like realistically. So if you're testing on something at that scale and you're just starting to get into commercial and stuff like that, you really need a full day between testing before it's any amount of relevant. Otherwise, you're going to end up with different concentrations at different ends of the system. Until that system is turned over 4 or 5 times, you're not going to get a good, average on that whole system. You're going to end up with some discrepancies. So, if you're doing, the larger your system, the longer you need to do between the testing times. But at the same time, you get more stability because the higher the water volume, the longer it takes to change a given nutrient value. So it's kind of a trade-off.
Right. I think it's very important to note the differences, I feel like, between, especially because I feel like I get a lot of questions from people. It's funny because I remember, I think we talked about this before too, is that I'm a member of cannabis groups, of just people that like to grow cannabis in traditional ways. And I'm a member of aquaponics groups, and a lot of times they are people that don't grow cannabis, us being, the few exceptions. And so in each groups, I end up talking about the opposite topic way more than I talk about in the actual group. If I'm in the aquaponics group, I have a lot of people that ask questions about cannabis, and vice versa. In the cannabis group, I have a lot of people that want to ask questions about aquaponics, and it's an interesting dynamic to where I know people are starting to make that transition from hydro over to wanting to do more organic solutions and follow along with a lot of the stuff that they are, in the living soil sort of revolution, are wanting to do a lot of those same things indoors. And they can do it obviously with small pots of soil indoors. It's kind of a popular thing to be able to do now, but a lot of people want advantages of going hydro. And I definitely see that. So I know that transition is there. So that's why I want to try to highlight as much as I can between the differences between hydro and aquaponics, and why some of your habits that you might have will be different when you move into aquaponics. Because a lot of people want to make it seem like it's really easy to do, which it is easy to do. It's kind of like labs. It's easy in the physical practice of just putting milk in and letting it sit, and there's not a lot to necessarily do, but there is a lot to understand. So that's what I feel like we can do with this, is have a way to be able to say, okay, well, if you're transitioning from hydro over to aquaponics, here's some of the maybe lines of thought or trains of thought that you want to try and derail, because you don't need them anymore. They become irrelevant. Like the pH below 6 is really just not something that you should ever think about. And then like what we were just talking about also. So
yeah, there's a few rules that you got to kind of forget about, and you got to stop being so finicky about EC. EC is another one where, in fact, was it just recently in the last day or two, I forget which Facebook group, there was a guy asking about about testing equipment. And this guy was saying how he does primarily testing by tasting his water. You know, that's ridiculous. First off, God forbid you have salmonella or E. coli in there, you're risking your life. You're at the very least going to make yourself sick. And there's zero risk of your plants, cannabis plants especially, or tilapia, which the University of Hawaii has shown. Even if you have E. coli or salmonella present, there's zero risk of you uptaking it in an aquaponic system. They've done test after test since 2011. They do tests every 3 to 6 months, and they have yet to prove a single positive tissue sample in both vegetables or fish tissue. You know, so there's no reason to worry about that. But at the same time, you shouldn't be tasting your water to test it. You need to go out, get the pH test kit, get a nitrogen test kit, get your set of test kits that you need to properly operate. If you're doing commercial, you should be sending out your water for agricultural water testing, or you should have the ability to do that type of test on property. You know, one or the other. So, and if you're not, you know, you need to be looking at what you're doing, because you're not producing at proper yields, nor are you at all monitoring what you're doing. You know, if your pH fluctuates out, you could be totally locking out a whole set of nutrients without even realizing it. And then all of a sudden you're going to end up with nutrient deficiencies in your plants, and you're going to think that you need to add this out of the nutrient, and it's not. The nutrients fully available, you know, the nutrient value is perfectly fine if you measure it in the parts per million, but the fact that the pH level's off means your plant can't pull it out of the water. So that's why pH, and we were talking about this today, is so important. Maintaining it in that 6.2 to 6.8 range for cannabis and aquaponics. You know, I like it a little bit closer to 6.6 to 6.8. I know you like it a little bit on the lower range, but honestly, anywhere in that range is perfectly fine as far as getting a decent production. So as long as you're maintaining that in that range, it really doesn't matter, you know, what you're doing to maintain that or anything else. But if you get it outside of that, you're hamstringing yourself and making your own work harder. And not to mention, you're not going to get the results you want out of your plants that you're looking for.
Right, and definitely anything higher than that, you know, it obviously has the same effect of going lower.
Exactly, to lock out your potassium and your iron. In fact, one of the people I'm working with right now is having an issue with high pH, and they're having some iron and phosphorus uptake issues.
Right, and so like you were saying, you think that you're lacking those particular things when really you probably have them in excess, just not able to be taken up because they've been building up in your system. And then you add more, which builds up even more, and then you have a crash and your plants die and your fish die, and then
exactly. I'll give you a great example. I have one of the people I'm working with is having an iron uptake issue. Their iron's at 3.2 ppm. Okay, the normal is 1 to 2 parts per million for iron. Okay, as far as aquaponics is concerned, they're at 3.2 and having an issue with it not being uptaken. They're not running into a toxicity. It's the fact that their pH is so off. Their pH is 8.2. Well, yeah, there's your problem. Get your pH down and your iron will fix itself. You know what I mean? You don't need to add iron. You need to fix your pH. And that's one of the biggest things, is that there's so many people out there preaching that aquaponics is only add fish food and forget that the rest is a thing, and that you can ignore science in this whole equation. And it's one of the biggest hurdles in aquaponics is everyone thinks it's magic. You know, you add fish to the water, fish food to the water, and fish in the water, and it just grows. There's more to it than that. If your pH is out of range, or this, that, or the other is out of range, you're not going to get the proper yields and what you're looking for, and you're going to be disappointed in what you're trying to do. And there's a lot of companies right now that thought it was that easy and are suddenly realizing the severe reality of the fact that you know, there's only a handful of people, me being basically one of the 2 people, that has ever done hard data mining on exactly what these nutrient ranges should be in order to maintain proper balance or nutrient level.
Right. And also not kill your fish. I mean, right?
Exactly, and maintain fish and account for fish lethality, because if you boost your potassium too high, you'll give them all heart attacks. You boost your phosphorus too high, you'll screw with their gills. You know, there's every mineral will do something different to your fish if you boost it too high. So, you know, making sure you're accounting for fish lethality as well as what the plants need is a whole other balancing act that we haven't even touched on.
Right. And, you know, maybe that'll be a good topic we can start on for next week.
Yeah, for next week, absolutely. We need to get wrapped up here before too long. I have to get working, but it was absolutely a great episode. I do apologize for the periodic dropouts. We'll get that fixed for next week's episode and everything. I'll get Marty everything he needs to host, and we'll get that all set up so that there's not as much of an issue, and we'll get things rocking.
All right, sounds good.
And thanks everybody for watching. If you guys are wanting to follow us more, I'm Ponics on any kind of social media you're looking for. If you guys are interested in personal consulting or anything else, you can shoot me an email at potentponics@gmail.com if you need any kind of aquaponics consulting or help, and Marty will mention his stuff.
Yeah, you can look me up on YouTube. I'm AP Meds on YouTube, like Aquaponic Meds, and then on Facebook, my name is Marty Waddell. You can just message me there. We are both members of the Aquaponic Cannabis Growers Group, which we moderate on Facebook. Definitely check that out and join up there. We like to post updates and pictures and different things there, and gives us another forum to be able to discuss with you guys. And honestly, it's nice just to know that there are others out there. I know probably Steve probably felt that way in the beginning too. It was just like somebody else that was attempting to do anything was nice to talk to, not somebody that was going like this to it, you know, and just didn't want anything to do with it, which is what you run into in a lot of both the aquaponic side of the table and on the cannabis growers table. So, you know, definitely meet up with us in there. And, you know, I have people that just message me on Facebook all the time with questions, anything from, you know, how do I deal with spider mites or PM, or, you know, what should I be adding to my system, or what shouldn't I be adding to the system? So, you know, anything you guys need, join the conversation. It's good stuff.
Yeah, and I just want to do a quick shout out too. If you guys want to check out the Dude Grows Show, I was recently over on the Dude Grows Show, episode 225. I had about over an hour-long interview with those guys, and it was really good to talk to them about different things. And I recently, yesterday, actually finished up an interview with Dope Magazine. So if you guys are interested, definitely check out Dope Magazine. I'll have a real good interview with them about aquaponic growing and some of the stuff we got going on down here in Jamaica. And if you guys are looking to check out, you know, some more info on aquaponics production, definitely check those two out. And you know, I'll have some more info for you guys soon for next time. We have some other projects in the work aside from down here in Jamaica, both up in Canada, and some new projects down here in Jamaica that are potentially unraveling. So definitely let us know. And I know Marty's got some different stuff going on up in Oregon, and you know, definitely follow up and make sure that you guys are keeping track with what we're doing. And if you guys need help with your own projects, with Marty and I are more than happy to reach out and help you in any way that we can, either, you know, on a consultation basis or otherwise.
All right, guys, have a good one.
Thank you guys for joining us, and make sure to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and like our videos in both AP Meds and Ponics. And thanks for joining us, and I'll see you all next time.